Yes, sir. You betcha. It's 3 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday, March 22nd, and we say curtain at 3 o'clock. We go at 3 o'clock. Now, this is 5 minutes after 3. That's one of the things I hated about working at when a big Broadway legit house is like 3 o'clock curtain was always 3:05. Everybody knew that it was 3:05. It's like, well, 5 minutes to get to your seats. No, curtain's at 3 o'clock. You go at 3 o'clock. It drove me insane. It was just stupid. What's the point? If curtain's at 3:05, then say 3:05. Anyway, we go at 3 o'clock here because, because we're professionals. Also, by the way, who does a 3 o'clock Tuesday afternoon live stream long form interview with the likes of David Marcus? Well, I do because, there are no rules here. We can do whatever we want. Now, if you're watching us live today on the stream, go ahead and comment. We'll ask your questions later if we can get to them, but I got a ton of questions for our guests. And especially, I want you to join our locals page. It's larryo'connor.locals.com. You can join and get alerted to these interviews ahead of time, become a part of it. Eventually, these things are going to be exclusive to locals for live streams, and then, we'll post them later on YouTube. But if you want to interact, that's what you want to do. And you can join for free. Just use the code LarryYT. That's YT for YouTube, not for Young Thing, but that works too. Larry Young Thing. It's actually the working title that Michael Jackson was working with for Pretty Young Thing, but it turned into, it sounded better as Pretty Young Thing instead of Larry Young Thing. A lot of people don't know that. See, you learn something new about me every day. All right, let's bring in our guest. He is an author. He is a New York Post columnist, and he's honestly one of the most interesting guys out there right now doing what he does. He is David Marcus. And David, thank you. You know what? I like the double shot there. Thank you for doing this with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So here's why this is going to be cool. We're going to talk about anything, everything. You can talk about anything. I know that from your writing and from your social media interactions. But the weird thing is you and I know each other, and we've seen each other a couple of times in passing. We've had these like surface sort of, yeah, I know you, you know me kind of conversations. But this will be the first time I actually get to know you. And we've got, thousands of people watching. So what's wrong with that?
I tell everyone you're one of my dearest friends.
Is that right? Shit. So already we know that David is a complete and total phony. So that's cool. Yeah. I like that. So now, for the longest time when I was doing what I'm doing here in DC and doing radio and podcasting and columns and stuff, more people would come up to me and say, you've got to know David Marcus. Do you know David Marcus? You should get to know David Marcus because we have this theater thing in common. Your roots, before you started doing this, you worked in theater in New York. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was most of my adult life. So I was sort of weirdly bracketed. When I was a kid, I was very interested in politics and, so, wanted to be a lawyer and, go to Congress and stuff. And I kind of, I got bit with the acting bug when I was in high school. Ended up going to NYU briefly for acting and then sort of like just going out into the Philly and eventually the New York theater world.
Hold on. You went to Tisch?
I did. I did. Not for very long, but
that's not easy to get into. Tisch School of the Arts is like that's hardcore. That was your undergrad for theater?
That was the undergrad, yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. No, it was pretty intense. I mean, New York in general, everyone's really good.
Yeah.
So it's and I did all right. I had some, I had some good roles and stuff and did okay, but then I was the co-producer of a theater company called Blue Box Productions, hence my Twitter bio, Blue Box Dave.
Blue Box Dave, yeah.
My joining Twitter was before journalism while I was still producing theater.
Yeah.
And so my co-producer was Libby Emmons, who's also now in conservative journalism, who's the editor-in-chief of Post Millennial. And we ran the theater company for about 15 years. Our signature show was a show called Sticky that would happen in a lounge space. And they were 10-minute plays. They had to take place in a bar, and they didn't happen on stage. They happened environmentally throughout the space.
Well, that's fun.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
So, and that was a nonprofit theater. So did you have to get
mired? No, that was not.
It wasn't. Oh, that was a commercial space. Oh, all right. Well, that's.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, we never made much money, but the entire time that I was in theater, and in fact, the very first article that I ever ran at the Federalist back in 2013, which was calling for the end of the NEA. I think the not-for-profit movement absolutely destroyed theater. There's no question about it in my mind. What happened was, instead of a new young theater company, really any theater company, thinking about what do audiences want to see? They think about what's going to get us some grant money,
Yeah.
and the audience is an afterthought. And it's just been in a death spiral because, in fact, nobody wants to go get yelled at about not being trans inclusive enough. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not actually, the show that people want to go see.
Yeah. Oh my God. You're speaking my language. When I was first writing for Andrew Breitbart at Big Hollywood, I don't know, but I started just writing about theater, but I was anonymous because I was still in the business. So I used the name Stage Right. That was my
Hmm.
pseudonym because it was the renegade days of the internet, right? 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
And I remember writing this whole breakdown of nonprofit theater and institutional theater and regional theaters. And it was really centered around what I think is the poisonous role of the dramaturg. Because the dramaturg works hand in hand with the development department. And basically, as you just said, the funding tail wags the artistic dog.
Oh yeah.
And I worked in commercial theater, but then I also worked in nonprofit theater. I worked in both camps. And in the nonprofit theater world, very rarely is there ever a conversation that centers around the audience, about the
Yeah.
person who's actually buying the ticket and what their stake in the game is, which is that's what theater is supposed to be all about.
It was. I mean, now it's supposed to be about, I mean, now it's literally supposed to be about indoctrinating people.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's the role that the audience plays. And it's sad. And even before COVID, the New York theater scene was getting pretty barren. I don't know that it comes back in any way, shape, or form that we remember it. But I'm kind of hopeful that that might be a good thing because, one of the things that we ran into, like our show got pretty popular. Like we always sold out our show. Like we would make a little bit of money off our show, but we were never able to scale it up.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in order to really like quit our day jobs and have this be what we do, we were going to have to be doing it like 8 shows a week and really just scaling everything that we do up. And one of the problems that we faced was that we were in competition with all of these companies that didn't care if they made a profit or not.
Yeah.
And it makes it impossible to compete.
Yeah, completely unequal playing field.
Yeah.
And then that, of course, when you're getting that funding, regardless of the tickets you sell, that actually draws more talent to you. You get a
Yeah.
better pick of talented people who want to, because they want to go where the money is, obviously,
Yeah. Yeah.
even though they'll tell you otherwise. Let's go back for a minute though. When you said you were pursuing acting and then you ended up going into producing, I think there's tons of people who love theater or sort of have an inclination toward the creative arts and performing arts, and all they know in high school is acting, right? You
Right.
like you love it, but it's not like there's a lane to be a stage manager or producer or director in your high school drama. So was that sort of you? It's like that was me. I acted in high school, but then 6 months into being post high school, seeing what that world was like and knowing that I actually, enjoyed having a steady paycheck such as it is, I immediately said, "Oh, wait a minute, I don't love acting, I love theater." And that's when I got into production and management.
Yeah, I mean, I love them both in kind of different ways, but they are different. I mean, really, what happened was when Libby and I decided we were going to do our first show in Philly, which I want to say was either 98 or 99, right? Um, we did it the way you did it back then. We rented for 3 weeks a small theater space in Philly called the Adrian. This was really not pre-internet, but like pre-internet marketing. So we had postcards and flyers and
Yeah.
literally on the phone, like, please come out. Um, that show, we got our first review. It was in City Paper, and it was a blaring headline that said, "Too little, too soon." So
Oh.
it just like thrust right, and might have been, I don't know, right? Like we had never done this before, but in any event, it cost several $1,000s, and we were able to raise that, and then it was over, and we felt good about it, but we didn't have another several $1,000s, and we didn't want to get into this whole like cycle of, all right, let's go beg for money again.
Yeah, yeah.
And we had been hanging out at this really chill bar called Bar Noir in Philly, which was oddly enough like where like all the movie stars would come. But like
Huh.
somehow Libby and I hit it off with this guy, Dave Carroll, who owned it. And he had been a club owner in New York in like the 80s and stuff. He was sort of a connected, plugged in guy. And he liked us, right? I mean, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
he would let us, there'd be a line out the door and we'd walk right past it. We had no money. So we were like, had a tab. It was ridiculous. And he had the idea of doing 10-minute plays in his space.
Okay.
And that was when we first did it. Um, and it just worked. It
Yeah.
just it and he also came up with one of the key ideas that made that show and made it run for 15 years. That first show was thinking it had to be play, 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 right? So
Yeah.
the first play was done and we had to like switch out mics because we were using like remote mics so that everyone could hear. And I'm freaking out because like we're losing the crowd, and he looks over at me and he just starts going like this, like, no, it's cool.
Yeah.
Like take a break, let it go. And so we took about 5 or 6 minutes before we came back into the next show. And he was so right.
Yeah.
That's what made the show, was that you were really just at a social event. It was a salon. You could talk, you could meet people. More people got laid going to stick. It was unbelievable.
I believe it. I
And
believe it.
yeah, that was the vibe. And he had a lot to do with that.
Well, and that's amazing that it took his eye to know his space and to know his clientele to understand the pacing of what was
Mhm.
really going to work. And it totally makes sense. Obviously, as you're describing, it's like, yeah, I don't want to go to a bar and then just have to sit there and be quiet for an hour and a half. But
That's right.
every 10, 15 minutes, another thing pop. Can we, is this idea dead? Can we do this in DC and actually revitalize some of the bars downtown?
Well, I mean,
Come on, Marcus, hop out on the
I
Acela.
don't
Let's
know.
put on a
Well, I mean,
show.
first, I don't know. First of all, you're going to get me into contract negotiations with
Oh,
Libby, and she's
here
tough.
we go.
So,
Here we go.
but
Jeez.
like, but no, I mean, look, it can be, and environmental theater did kind of take off a little bit. I want to say in like 2012, 2013 ish. For some of the practical reasons of it's really expensive to use a theater space, and you
Yeah.
did see a little more of that in New York. And I think to some extent, if theater is coming back in the next couple of years, I think you're going to see more of that found space, more of that sort of like you're out doing. I just think people like it more these days.
Yeah, I think it, and it does, it sets it apart. And I think it also changes expectations too. The problem is when you sit down in a traditional theater now, there are these expectations that the production qualities have to, look like a $10 million show. I mean,
Yeah,
I love the fact that was my old world. I used to work in the big houses and for the Schuberts and everything, but I recognize now how it is sort of, sadly, it's numbed the audience to anything other than that.
yeah, and
Um,
that becomes and it's one thing if you're talking about Lion King, right? Because like you need that, right? I mean, that's what you're going for.
yeah.
Um, but that does really become an excuse for the big not-for-profit theaters to sort of like you know, pad
Had the
their
budgets and the
ledgers,
staff,
because
yeah,
if
all of it.
those curtains, I mean, what does the one black curtain cost? Like literally like $10,000. Like
Yeah.
I don't think most of your viewers would know this, but those curtains, man, it's
Oh,
ridiculous.
yeah. Oh, but what's funny though, if you think back, like the big show. I mean, I'm a little bit older than you. When I started doing this in the late '80s, Chorus Line was still running, right? Chorus
Mhm.
Line, Michael Bennett's Chorus Line was the longest running show on Broadway, and people would flock to it, because they would see the advertising showed the big glitzy, spangled gold, big. That's the last 5 minutes of the show.
Mhm.
And you actually sit down and you realize, first of all, there's no intermission. The entire show takes place on a bare, empty stage.
Yeah.
And everyone's wearing the same costume, which is rehearsal leotards and dance clothes. And
Yeah, yeah.
not even sexy ones. It's in the 70s. It was ugly, right? And I remember I did like 2 tours at Chorus Line, and people would leave the theater and going, "It was good, but I really, I like the costumes and cats, I like the set didn't do anything," they would say.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like, yeah, but it's a great show,
Yeah.
but there's this expectation. So now wait, I got to go back. So you and your partner, Libby,
Mhm.
you're did you know that you said you were always interested in politics, but did you both know that you were sort of counterculture to the typical theater political perspective? Because did you realize and sort of discover each other being a little right of center?
Not really. I mean, I can't really speak for, sort of Libby's journey into this. I was very open about being conservative. And
Were
so
you
like
always conservative? Is
no,
this just were you
well,
raised conservative?
it's like that's complicated. I came up basically like a sort of conservative pro-life Bob Casey Pennsylvania Democrat.
Okay.
which
Got
is
it.
really not, it's not a thing anymore.
Yeah, nowadays that's a moderate Republican. Yeah.
Yeah, I was basically like a sort of Pennsylvania conservative Democrat because everybody was a Democrat. So yeah, I mean, I always ran a little more in that direction. It really wasn't until maybe 2005, 6, 7 that I started to sort of vote Republican and think of myself as a Republican and a conservative.
Were you able to? I'll never forget. I was hosting a board meeting for the League of Los Angeles Theaters, and it was I represented the big commercial theaters, but there were also theaters of every stripes, nonprofits, institutional, and little 99-seat theaters. The LA theater scene. It's
Yep.
all these the theater 40 seats, and they're doing it for the showcasing actors and all. So people of all stripes. But I was hosting. It was at my theater. We were hosting this board meeting on election night 1994 when the Republicans took over the House for the first time in like 40 years.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I realized how alone I was politically. I never talk politics because politics is boring. I mean, it's funny. That's what I do for a living now. But honestly, I'd rather talk about everything but politics, frankly. But that night, everyone was acting like it was the end of the world.
Yeah.
Because Republicans took over the House, and I realized I can't really talk about politics with the people I work with and I'm closest to.
Oh, and I mean, in '94, I mean that was nothing. I mean, I experienced it was nothing because nobody cared about politics in the '90s. Like,
well, these guys were all sure that the NEA was going to get it. Oh, that's it. The Republicans are in. They're going to defund the NEA. That's all.
No, I mean, yes, Republicans were bad, of course, right? But like, nobody was running around in 1996 saying like, "Oh my God, if Bob Dole wins, it's the end of the world."
Yes.
I mean, nobody cared really in the '90s about, but like everything was fine. It was fine, right? Democrats, Republicans, what is it? You get to, by the time you got to say 2010 or whatever, though, that would become really, maybe even a little earlier, whenever like sort of Friends of Abe was starting to pop or whatever, like Friends of Abe, if people don't know, is sort of an organization of people in entertainment who had a conservative leaning.
Right.
And yeah, it got toxic. And like I said, I was very straightforward about it. And I was the host of that show, Sticky, and I would play the foil to the audience. Right. In the 2012 election, I would just drag Obama.
That's great.
But it was like a character. I mean, it was me, but it was like a character, right?
Yeah.
And everybody in the audience was a Democrat and like loyal to Obama. And they'd throw it back at me, right? There'd be heckling and we'd go back and forth. And it was a hoot. But that was when you could still do that.
Sure. Yeah, that's like the groundlings yelling back at the actors,
But post-Trump, you couldn't do that, right?
Toxic.
During the 2012 campaign, I could do the show and then I would be hanging out with people afterwards and we would have conversations. I remember one guy saying to me, I like Condoleezza Rice, just as like a peace offering or whatever. I was like, I like Condoleezza Rice too. But you could have these conversations. Post-Trump, no.
Can't do it.
You can't, and it's insane.
It is. Do you think it gets better? You think anything gets it better? Because it's become such a it's a death sport now. It's life or death. Everything is life or death. Mostly with the left, but I think conservatives also use the life and death stance on a stupid election as well. If there's one thing I hate hearing, and my colleagues do it all the time, this next election is the most important election of our lifetime. I've heard that for my entire lifetime.
Yeah.
Just stop with it.
I mean, look, I think things will eventually get better. I think that both the American right and the American left are in a period of really great upheaval. I think both political parties are in the midst of a whole lot of ideological upheaval. I think this happened a little sooner for the Republicans with Trump. I think it's coming for Democrats, who are clearly in the midst of an identity crisis. And also, I think clearly in a similar position to where Republicans were, where the elites of the Democratic Party right now are wildly out of step with the average Democrat voter.
Yeah.
Right, on stuff like CRT, on stuff like on all the culture war stuff.
Yeah.
Right, they're wildly, even on like the environment stuff. Right, they're wildly out of step with the average Democratic voter in a way that reminds me of how the Mitt Romneys of the world were wildly out of step with the Republican voter in 2012, 2013, 2014.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of upheaval. And I think in those periods of upheaval, people get a little tribal. And so I hope that at a certain point, we get to the other side of that.
Those people that you identified yourself as, the Pennsylvania, Casey, pro-life Democrat, you were Democrat because you didn't want to associate with those, blue blazer country
Right.
club types. And you like to go and hang at the bar and enjoy an Eagles game. And your dad was a plumber or worked on the factory, something like that. But either way, you had that affinity. Those guys, now this is where this shift is taking place right now, where all those guys now, as soon as Trump came on the scene, remarkably, they were like, hell yeah. It's
Yeah.
like Trump was fine. So now how does this sort of spin out? Because I think that's a very real thing. I don't know if the Republicans in charge of the party now are able to reinforce that we are the ideological home or the appropriate home for them. I don't know if they have the discipline.
I think they've been doing a pretty decent job. And I think that to a large extent, Trump's program, which I actually don't think originated with Trump. I think it goes back to the 1992 election and a combination of Ross Perot and Pat Buchanan.
Yeah.
I think if you put the two of those together from 1992, Perot more on the sort of like economic, trade, suspicious of immigration stuff, Buchanan more on like the culture war stuff. They laid sort of the groundwork for Trump-style populism. And people forget the first votes Trump ever got for president were not in 2016. He ran in 2000 for the Reform Party nomination, and he won California and Michigan. He eventually sort of dropped out and stuff. But I think, that's where it came from, and it was eventually able to overtake the Kevin McCarthy's of the world, right?
Yeah.
I think Kevin McCarthy's the young gun who survived because he's adapted to this. And I think he really has adopted the Trumpian program. I think the GOP has. The Democrats still have to decide if they're going to fully adopt the AOC style progressivism or if they still have a road back to being more moderate. I suspect they don't have a road back at this point.
It's funny. I agree with you on McCarthy, and I think that he's made this this flip somewhat reluctantly. I know people who work in his staff, and they're real. They're for real, and they assure me that he's sort of made this flip too. And I think what made the flip for McCarthy in terms of being a true believer and really understanding, sort of reading the room, is how ugly it got for him from the left. It's like when the left, when the media, when pop culture, when the late night shows, when people on social media, when they come after you in such a vicious way, you have two ways to go. You can either accommodate them and oh no, I'm not like that. I'm not like those guys over there, and you become, Adam Kaczynski or Adam I've forgotten his name already. The Kinzinger. Or you say, oh hell no. Oh hell no! You think that no, and you actually get radicalized on the other end of it, and I think he has. I think he's actually in his own way gotten that radicalization because of them, because of the way they treated him.
I agree. I also think that he's just done a pretty good job of handling the caucus in terms of not trying to police the new right, but also being able to draw a line with Cheney and Kinzinger, who clearly threw the party under the bus by participating in this farcical, committee and giving it some, fake legitimacy of being bipartisan. But interesting story about McCarthy. So back in September, I was covering the California recall for Fox News. They sent me out there for like a week to bop around. And I specifically chose to go to Bakersfield, which, by the way, I loved Bakersfield. And everyone I know from California looks at me like I've got two heads when I say that.
You know what else is cool? Fresno.
But I liked
Have you been to Fresno's also very
No,
cool.
I was in Modesto. I missed Fresno, and Modesto was all right. It was a little more sort of like a strip mall. But
my mom's from Modesto. Water, wealth, contentment, health, man. Did you cruise the strip like American Graffiti?
I wasn't in a car, but I was down at the strip. But
that's pretty good.
No, but Bakersfield I really liked. It had that like dusty, dark yellow feeling of like the Old West,
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I wanted to go to Bakersfield had nothing to do with the recall. I was curious about McCarthy. I wanted to hear from people in his own districts. That's his district. So I'm hanging out, talking to all these people. First of all, like they all knew him personally in some way, shape, or form. So he's clearly sort of around the district. And they all generally liked him, but to a person, they all had some bone to pick with him. Something. Um,
Yeah.
like he was too hard on Trump. He wasn't hard enough on Trump. Everybody had something that like they were annoyed at him for doing. But then I'd say, like, do you think he'd make a good speaker? And they go, oh yeah, he'd make a good speaker. And I feel like that's almost the quality that sort of is going to make him a good speaker if he gets to be there. That like he's accommodating enough to everybody, but also everybody has some issue with him. But I think he's done a good job, and I think he's where he needs to be.
It's funny. My friend Chris Plant, who has a nationally syndicated show, he's based out of DC. He like his favorite line about Kevin McCarthy is, "Yeah, he'll be a fine speaker. My only problem is that I like a speaker who can speak."
Right. Well,
But you know what? I don't. There's no. Why is it just assumed that just because the Sunday shows invite the Speaker of the House on because he's the highest ranking Republican in the House, that he has to be the spokesperson? McCarthy can run the House, run the caucus, push legislation, do what he needs to do. But if hopefully his ego is tame enough where he can say, you know what, I don't have to accept every George Stephanopoulos invite. I don't have to let other people come in and do that work, and you do the actual work of the Speaker of the House. I
And
hope.
I think that's important too, because right now I don't think there's enough of a unified message for any one person other than Trump to be the one person who's out there saying what Republican or conservative ideas are, because I think that we're in the middle of an ideological battle
Yeah.
over what that's going to be. We've certainly seen that with Ukraine, right? And I think one of the reasons that we've seen it so pointedly with Ukraine is that, unlike most issues, Trump hasn't provided a clear roadmap on this, right? I think
Right.
the populists on the one hand can say, well, Trump was against like foreign adventures, and that's true. However, the people who are more hawkish, and I'm sort of in that camp, can point to reports that Trump told Putin if he invaded Ukraine, he'd flatten Moscow.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
you can there.
Well,
I don't
and
think there was a Trump foreign policy doctrine, and so I think we're left to kind of fight over that.
yeah, I got the extent. If there was one, it was America first. If it's not in America's direct interest, we're not going to do it. And don't fuck with us, and
Yeah.
beyond that. But there is, I mean, I think there's a roadmap, a bit of a roadmap with Ukraine, in that he did in fact arm them.
Hmm.
He did in fact, and so I mean, I think that we're kind of following that. But I'm with you in terms of, when Republicans they will take over the House. The question is by how many, and I think they'll take over the Senate as well. It still serves us right now that Biden is president, in terms of serves us as a conservative movement, in that we don't have to articulate what we stand for. When you're
Yeah.
in the opposition, all you have to do is articulate what you're against, and
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. That's the nature of our system. And then we coalesce around a nominee. We're already getting way into politics, which I wanted to save till the end, but I don't care. That's fine.
It's
But
it's not that different. I'll tell
well,
you, having spent most of my adult life in theater, and now having spent almost a decade as a columnist, it's a lot of overlap, man. It's all
yeah,
storytelling, right? And it's
yeah.
all framing. There's a lot of overlap.
Tell me about that in terms of, well, how did the transition happen? How did the transition from creating theater in very, unique and avant-garde spaces with an eclectic group of players, how did that turn? And that's a very social endeavor. And the one
Mhm.
thing that people don't know about theater, and they should know about theater, is no matter what you do on a play, no matter what your role is, what your job is, even the ushers, if you are part of what happens every night when the curtain goes up, it is incredibly communal. It is so social. It's impossible to work in that business and be an introvert, I
Yeah.
mean, because you got to mix, and yet what we do, you are literally, I mean, except when you're out covering something for Fox, when you're out interviewing or talking about people, but ultimately it comes down to you writing the word on the page. And it's incredibly insular. It's incredibly solitary. How did you get from A to B?
Yeah, I mean, so They are different, and what you say is true. And one of the differences that I've thought about is when you're doing a production, and it's interesting what you say about it, it is very social, right? But for like 2, 3 months at a time. And then you might
Yes.
not see these, and then a new bunch of people for 2, 3 months at
That
a
oh,
time,
that's such a
right?
great point. They always say, "Oh, this show is a family." It's like, "Okay, but you're not gonna talk to your family when this is over, and maybe you'll see them again at the
Right,
bar."
yeah,
Yeah,
something, right? But
yeah.
it's not, no, this really intense period of several months that you have together is there, and then it's over for the
It's
most
very
part, right?
unnatural, very unnatural.
Um,
Yeah.
which is different. But one of the things about working on a play, and then I will answer your question of how the transition happened. But one of the things about working on a production is that everybody has personal skin in the game. So everyone's name is on the poster and in the playbill. What the actor, the director, the
Oh, yeah.
the the playwright, the lighting designer, the set designer, right? And if the play does well, everybody personally benefits. If the play does really badly, everybody personally, you know,
Yeah.
gets sort of
Yeah.
hammered for that, right?
Yeah.
That is very different than journalism, where there are still an incredible number of people who are doing most of the work to get an article out, either in the paper or up on a website. But at the end of the day, there's only one name,
Yeah.
right? Everybody else is sort of like amorphously covered by the outlet. And so if a correction has to be if you get something wrong, if it's dumb, whatever it is, like, it's you.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a difference in terms of how the two work. But I mean, basically what happened to me was like I was I was not finding much theater that I was super interested in doing. Um, and I had just had my son was born, which makes those kind of hours hard. So I had sort of stopped doing theater, except for that show Sticky. I was still sort of involved in that, but I started a blog writing about theater from a conservative perspective. And then I did that for a little while, and then I think September of 2013, I saw a tweet from Ben Domenech that said, "Today we're launching the Federalist, journal of politics, religion, and culture." And I saw culture, and I said, "Oh, I write about that." So I didn't know who Ben was, or know him or anything, but I just replied like, how could I pitch?
Yeah.
And he sent me the email, and I sent him a pitch, and then I wrote there for 7 years. So that was the
So Ben is to you what Andrew Breitbart was to me. It's a very, very similar
Yeah.
story
I
there.
I I
Yeah.
mean, Ben, yeah, I think what that whole team at the Federalist did was incredible, but certainly a lot of the creative vision was Ben's, and it was, you know, having been there from right at the beginning. I mean, it was and remains and just an incredible incubator of creative ideas and creative ways of thinking about telling the story
Totally.
of the United States. It was just an amazing place to be.
Yeah, and they're doing great work, and they're being richly rewarded for it
Mhm.
as well. They should. But he has. I know Ben well. He's a friend. In fact, we're going to dinner tonight.
Nice.
He it from the beginning he calls us the creatives. He likes to refer to everybody who has a world outside of politics and used to work in some level of entertainment. It's he gets it. He understands how important it is. I appreciate that there every day there's at least one column about what's going on outside of politics.
Mhm.
Did you I one of the things that frustrates me is I still feel like most of our world doesn't get that. That I would write a column about something on Broadway or something in theater. Even I would write a column about commentators on an NBA basketball game getting political. This is years ago.
Yeah.
Years ago when I mean now you literally can't watch any sporting event without there being some level of politics injected into it. But 8 years ago it bothered me. I would write about it, and you read the comments, and I don't read the comments anymore, but I used to, and they're like, no one cares. I haven't watched television in 20 years. No one cares about this. No one cares. It's like, no, everyone cares about
Mhm.
this actually. And I think it's to our detriment that we poo poo this. That too many of us poo poo it actually.
I agree, although I think there's at least an acknowledgement of that of that gap in conservative culture content that people are trying to fill. and really sort of leaning into the concept of being the counterculture, which conservatism, of course, absolutely is.
Yeah.
Um,
But just
but
not in the culture yet, at least, or at least not enough. Not enough.
it's, I wonder about what the culture is anymore in significant ways, in large part because of just how segmented content is these days and how difficult it is for anything to truly saturate. When you look at a popular TV show of the 90s, right? Like a Seinfeld or a Friends or something
Mhm.
like that. I'm gonna tear these numbers. I'm gonna get these numbers wrong, but you'll get the idea. They would regularly get something like a 20 share, right? Like in the like 20% of people who have their TV on is
Right.
is watching this show. That's unheard of now. I mean, 5 is great now, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not even watching the same service, right? Like you're on cable, you're on Netflix, you're on Disney Plus. So it's very difficult. We do have broad cultural trends do exist across all of these things. One of the main places where they do is advertising, right?
Mm.
Because that's really the only thing left that we all see.
That's interesting. Yeah,
You
you're
know,
abs
you know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Like
totally,
we all know
totally.
Flow from Progressive. We all know, right?
Right.
We all know these ads. We don't all watch Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
We don't all. Those are actually pretty small groups of people
Yeah.
compared to what we were used to. So I don't know what the culture is right now, man.
Interesting. Yeah. Is there a lane then because of that? Because
Yeah,
it's a little more like we see that our friends over at Daily Wire are really trying to push this, and they're trying to create and push things. My antenna goes up whenever conservatives who have legitimate, credentials and talent and abilities step forward and say, "I'm going to make a commercial movie or a conservative movie or a conservative TV show." It's like, no, don't tell me you're making a conservative thing. Just make something good.
yeah,
If you are conservative and you either write, produce, direct, or act in it, and you have those values, you have that perspective, it's gonna come through no matter what. You
yeah.
can do Hamlet and it's gonna be a conservative Hamlet. Just be good.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that it is sort of asymmetrical in that sense, in that the left has developed an aesthetic,
Yeah.
in which it's very easy for them to sort of like pocket their ideological or political agenda within an effective piece of theater,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. Years ago, I had a play in what was called like I think they called it the Republican Theater Festival. This is going back. I'm gonna say this is like maybe 2011.
Is that the guy in Ohio?
No, it's not. It's
Okay.
before the guy in Ohio.
And
It
sorry,
was
guy in Ohio, by the way. I know your name and we met at CPAC and
Yeah,
I like
Robert
that.
Cooperman is the guy in
Thank you. You're
Ohio.
right. Robert
Yes.
Cooperman.
Yeah, and I applaud what he's doing. No, this was before that. And that was already a question like, well, what does this mean? Like, is it pro-life? Is it like what does it mean for a
Yeah.
piece of art to be conservative? But I think you're right that you don't need to be overtly political. What I worry about in terms of the ability of conservatives to compete in the culture space is that I think a lot of it has been too top down and not enough bottom up, which is to say that all of those super super talented people who I was talking about at the beginning of this who go to Tisch, right?
Yeah.
They're still there. They're
Uh,
still enormously talented. Like, don't kid yourself about like their politics or whatever it is. They're enormously talented, and the left controls Tisch and Yale and Stella Adler and Strasberg, and so all of the places where talent is developed, right? The
right.
whole minor leagues
Yeah.
of entertainment is hegemonically controlled,
Yeah.
not just by the left, but by the far, far, far left.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And that's something where I think conservatives, if they're going to actually compete in this space, we need a farm team and we need to be developing it outside of those settings.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Especially since so many of those places are universities too,
Hmm.
because you've got this. You mentioned Yale Rep. You go look at Northwestern University. You look at Berkeley Rep. they're all affiliated with in one way or another with a university as well.
And it's
And
only since, I'm sorry to interrupt, it's
yeah,
only since the early to mid 60s
yes,
that that's even a thing,
yeah. I think
right? I
68
mean,
was the dawn of all these
for
places. Yeah,
hundreds of years, the way you became an actor was you showed up at the theater, you swept the floors and waited for a chance to get on stage, and maybe you were good and maybe you weren't, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
if you were, then you got to keep going on stage. Nobody went to college, let alone grad school, to
yeah.
learn how to be an actor. I mean, that would have seemed ridiculous to them.
I've got another theory about it too, which is, like what did you when you told your parents that you want to go to Tisch to get into theater and be an actor, what was their reaction?
I mean, they it's no, it's not even that. I mean, they were pretty mellow cats, man. They were like, they weren't hippies exactly, but they were both like sort of left-leaning lawyers who like did a lot of good and didn't make any money, and like
Yeah, yeah.
sort of ideas people,
Okay.
especially my mom. My mom was happy. My
Yeah.
mom was like, she thought it was great. She was very much about life being a thing that you went out and tried to
But you just said they were liberal hippies. Is that
yeah,
totally makes sense. See, now
yeah.
now I think most conservative parents raising their kids when they're 13, 14 years old, especially boys, by the way, when their sons at 13, 14 want to join drama or they want to be in the school musical or the school play, I think most conservative parents, number one, they might be have this. I'm it's a reality. They're going to think, "Oh God, is my son gay?" Because he wants to sing and dance on stage. Because there's a reason why that stereotype is there, right? And a lot of conservative dads say, "Why don't you join football instead? Come on, I'm going to toughen my son up," and bullshit like that. But also, you get into like 17, 18 years old and you say, I want to go to college and get a theater degree. Most conservative parents are going to say, no, not with my money, not with my tuition help. You're going to get something that you can pay the rent with. You're going to do something important and stable and sensible. And so conservative kids who may have this affinity to the creatives end up being steered away from it by their parents. And so you end up with a bunch of liberal kids going into the performing arts because their parents encouraged it.
I mean, I think that's possible, and that could be. I would say, as to the first concern, I'll just put it this way: when I got to Tisch, um, it was probably about 60% women, who were the most attractive women I had ever seen in my
Oh yes.
entire life.
Oh yes.
And of the 40% of guys, maybe like, 12 of us were straight. So that's
Oh,
this if that's your concern, like that could really cut both ways as far
My
as
my
being
dad
a
my
guy
dad
in theater.
figured it
But
out early on, like, after my freshman year in high school when I was in the musical, and he saw what kinda summer I had that year.
Mhm.
He said, "Oh, I get it now.
Yes.
I see what you're doing.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
see what you're doing," and
So
it's a
so
very real thing.
yeah, so I mean, I would assuage anyone's
Yeah.
anyone's concerns on that. Again, that can go both ways. But no, I mean, look, as to the other thing, I think everyone has to know their kid, right? And I think it depends. Look, there's a certain number of kids or young adults who are going to get out of college, get their job in whatever their major was, and be on their way to their career, and they buy a house at 32, and that's a trajectory, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, that's a great trajectory. Even a kid who doesn't go to college and wants to, be a plumber can do that trajectory, probably end up with more money by the time they're
Yeah.
33, quite honestly, right?
Oh, yeah.
Um, I think for the person who doesn't have that set desire yet in their early or mid 20s, and who feels like they want to explore different careers or things that they could do, for that, I think you could do a lot worse than theater or acting training, because it does end up helping you,
Oh, yeah.
in all kinds of areas not related to
100%.
theater. Just an ability to sort of present yourself, an ability to talk, and a bit,
So
uh, an
you
empathy.
totally. And I think that leads me to sort of your writing career, 'cause, I think it's fair to say your style of writing is distinctive. And you can tell you didn't go to your typical journalism school kind of environment.
Right.
Do you Are you conscious of this style that you have when you write, where you do create characters? There's a use of adjectives and a use of almost scenarios that you create within not every article, but a lot of them, that have obviously a theatricality to them, or at least an artistic bent to it. Is that is are you conscious of that, or is it just sort of that's what you know, so that's how it's going to be?
I'm conscious of very little else. Um, yeah, I mean that's it, right? I it's I've always believed that style was more important than content, that form was more important than story. I mean, let's be honest. On any given day, there's two or three stories. There's going to be five or six, really good other columnists basically writing my take, right? Something close. Look,
Yeah.
3-4 times a year, maybe you have some galaxy level take that everybody gasps and look, you need those are good, right? But
Yeah.
that's a very small part of the job.
Yeah.
Most of the job is being the sort of like literary equivalent of the guy at the corner of the bar who you kind of want to talk about politics or issues or stuff with, right?
Yeah.
um so yeah, I'm very conscious of that, and the writers who I most admire, James Joyce and Jack Kerouac and Hunter S. Thompson. These kinds of writers, style was always first. Because look, there's not that many stories at the end of the day.
You mentioned Hunter S. Thompson, and I was going to bring this up. You've been very open about your recovery, about your addictions and your recovery. And by the way, how's it going? I should ask.
Good, 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 good.
Second go around for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think next week I'll have 90 days this go around, so that's
Good for you.
it's good.
That's
Yeah,
God bless. That's
thank you.
fun. What do you think fueled your addictive personality more? Your time, because both of the worlds you've decided to occupy, the entertainment, performing arts, especially live theater, that world and the world of journalism and a newsroom environment, both are uniquely sort of known for festering that sort of addictive personality and bringing out the worst in people, or the worst instincts in that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. It's you can go a long time without it sort of catching up to you. So like I would drink before I went on stage, and as long as I was good,
Mm,
most people didn't care. Now, eventually in theater that caught up to me, and there were a couple like, sort of gigs that I lost or things that
mm.
happened, because I was drinking too much. But for the most part, the attitude was sort of like, do your job and like nobody cares. Similar sort of attitude prevalent in journalism, I'd say.
Oh yeah, they tolerate a lot. As long as you keep producing, as long as you keep
Yeah, yeah,
delivering.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which on some level, good, right? I mean, that's the job.
Yeah, but I worry sometimes. And I'd hate to interrupt you, but
Yeah,
because I've witnessed this, and it's like I think there's an attitude in some cases. I've seen it in the entertainment business, and I also see it in the media, where there's this sort of patronizing view from management or for the people in charge that this is how they get the best out of us. And in a way, they almost enable it. That it's
yes.
like, like this is who he is. This is what brings out the best. I mean, you see it in a horrible degree with people like Janis Joplin, you wish somebody was in the room with with John Belushi saying, no, 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 you're fucking funny. You don't need to be on coke all the time to be funny. But in Hollywood, they were like, oh yeah, that's John. Just, send him more coke. He'll be fine.
Yeah, and I think that gets to really ultimately, I'm an alcoholic, and I would have been an alcoholic if I was a lawyer, if I was
Huh.
whatever, right? It wouldn't have mattered. So I mean, yeah, like theater and journalism are both areas where there's a lot of drinking around, but I would have found it. Uh, it's like, you know,
Life
but I
finds a way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was. I mean, that was going to happen. But I do think ultimately, for me anyway, and it's something that other people have told me they've experienced, and stuff you sort of read about a little bit in things like the big book of AA and stuff. It does have a lot to do with confidence. Like uh, putting yourself out there is, especially like as an actor, it's just a ton of rejection, right? Like you numb to it to an extent, but you're still going through this like
Yeah.
thing, right? And
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
same thing, like, people hate you on Twitter, and it's like I'm never gonna like whine about that, but like it it washes over you, and confidence is a tricky thing. And I thought for a long time um that if I had a couple of drinks, then I could send a pitch, to the New York Times, right? Like, screw it, like I'll pitch it. And I'd need like a bunch of drinks to like get myself to do it, and then they'd take it, and I'd be like, and then I got into this cycle of like, this is how I do it.
Yeah.
And it took
Yeah.
me a long time, most of the past year, I'd say, to kind of reach the point where I feel like you don't have to do that. Like you you could just write the pitch. Like you
Yeah.
don't need the whole
I
parade.
I hear you though. I mean, there's a very real phenomenon of, one or two drinks loosening. Loosening up some level of creativity in a person's brain. Or I mean, I guess it's there anyway. As you said, yes, you can do it. The secret sauce is figuring out how to harness that without the vodka on the rocks to sort of loosen you up or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I know exactly what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. Now, I mean, in
It's
writing
very
for
real.
me, that's not, that would happen a little bit with acting, although that's complicated, right? Because it's your body. But with writing, it was an issue. I write very early in the morning, so even when I was drinking at my most, like I very little of anything I've ever published was written while I was, drinking or drunk, just because of, I wake up at like 5:30 or 6, and that's typically, I'm typically.
So I was going to ask you. So that's when you get most of your writing done is first thing in the morning. You wake up, you do your thing, coffee.
Yeah, I mean, the exception is like sometimes, the postal, it's, at like 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning, be like, can you turn something around? Or daily, someone will reach out to me and be like, can you turn something around fast? That would be the exception. But given my druthers,
Yeah.
yeah, I wake up, and do a couple hours very early.
Does the New York Post sort of do you have a beat, or can you, it's like whatever David wants to write about today, he can write about, or is it a little bit of both?
It depends really. Typically the Post will give me an assignment. I run a little more at Fox now than I do at the Post. I run, fairly often now at.
Still same ownership still, or I can't remember how that spun off with the
Yeah.
Murdochs and everything.
I don't know, with like the channel, and I don't know. I walk into that building and I'm just like confused immediately. I have no idea. No, it's utterly confusing. But Fox, I do more pitching, and they also sort of send me on the reporting trips that I do. So I was up in Ottawa
Yeah.
during the trucker
I saw
protest,
that.
and
I saw that. Yeah.
some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I've freelanced, I guess, over the last year or so. I had been on staff at the Federalist. That was very open. That was
Mhm.
basically right what I want, and that's pretty much where I am now.
Yeah.
Usually, if I have an idea for something I want to write about, I can find someplace to place it.
You were talking about how we got into this lane here because you were talking about your prose and how you who influences you and how that's how you distinguish yourself, because everyone else is going to have the same take. So have you written something that's probably more applicable to what you were doing at the Federalist? Have you written something that was sort of off left field? It's like, you know what, this matters to me. Probably no one else is writing about this in our world, but I just want to write this because I want to write it, and it ended up hitting like in a way that you never expected it to. It's like suddenly, oh my god, other people care about this too.
Yeah, there was one in particular, and it really is a testament to Ben Dominich's generosity of spirit. I was in Switzerland with Billy McMorris from the Washington Free Beacon.
Oh my god.
Uh,
Hold on.
yeah, yeah,
There are stories here.
yeah. I'm not telling those.
I've been drinking with Billy too.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm not telling those.
All right.
No, but Well, but I was at, Billy and I were at dinner, and I looked on Facebook, and my best friend from high school's father had been tragically killed. Had been, struck by a car and killed. And this was a guy who, when I was a teenager, my home life got like really messed up, and I basically ended up living with my best friend for, I mean, the better part of 6 months, like basically a whole school year. And just uh, Peter Jeffzikis was his name. And I mean, Peter was just wonderful. I mean, and incredibly generous to let me do that, right? So when I saw that he died, and I was so far away from Aaron, his son, and everybody, I emailed Ben, and I was like, nobody knows who this guy is, like outside of a few people in Philadelphia, but I'd really like to write about him. Is that all right? And I don't know if you ever emailed with Ben, but like if Ben emails you back 4 words, it's like a miracle.
Yes.
So I mean, he just emailed back like, of course,
Yeah.
right? So I just wrote about what an incredible thing it was that this man had done for me, and how grateful I was that he had done it. And they ran it, and again, because this was not a celebrity or anybody, you know, who people knew about, I didn't expect much reaction at all, and it was absolutely overwhelming. It was just like everybody, it seemed, had somebody in their life
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they would then tell me, no, this person helped me once. So yeah, that was, but that again, like that's Ben and everyone at the Federalist seeing it, right?
Yes, but it's also, I think it's we the writers, needing to force ourselves to recognize that everyone has those stories. Everyone can relate to all of these things that are well beyond whatever Tucker's going to talk about
Right,
tonight,
right.
and it's, but it's still a conservative column
Yeah,
because you are writing it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And it's funny. I have my article from this past year that hit me like that is going to help me transition to the next topic, because it really bothered me the way the public conversation was going about Biden putting himself up for the Eucharist when he goes to church,
right.
because I think that there's so many people who use Catholicism as a weapon one way or the other. I think we Catholics use it as a weapon sometimes, and even Catholics who were saying, why he shouldn't be getting communion, and they were angry at the bishops for allowing it and all that, and that was frustrating me too, because in a way I kind of understand the bishops' position. I don't want them to have the position they've got. I wish they took a stand, but I also recognize that there are other considerations there that I don't want to get into. I looked at it from this perspective. I was divorced. I was married in the church. I'm divorced. I'm married again without the benefit of annulment. So for 7 years now, I have denied myself the Eucharist. It is incumbent on me to not walk up to the priest every Sunday and put the priest in the position to deny me Eucharist. Biden should do that. The problem is Biden is actually forcing this issue on the church. He should know better. And I wrote that. I wrote about my personal experience and how I'm denying it. People still stop me and tell me how important that article was. And
Yes,
I
but
never expected it. Never
sometimes you
expected
don't sometimes you don't know what it's going to be, and that's one of the sort of like wonderful things about it, is that sometimes, it's just a passing thought that you have, and you decide to put it out there, and it can really resonate. It's pretty great when that happens.
You seem pretty passionate about your faith. And I've seen you on Twitter actually, openly praying a rosary on Twitter. And I think that, some people think you're being ironic. And the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, that's very cool. Talk to me about your relationship with the Catholic Church and with Mary and Jesus.
Yeah, I like being Catholic a lot. So again, my parents were sort of like 70s hippies, and my mother was Irish Catholic and my dad was Jewish. So they
Hmm.
didn't really know what to do about religion for me. And it was a little bit of a contentious issue in the family. Um, So they decided to let me choose. They basically taught me both, and they said, when you're 10, you got to pick. And not picking one wasn't an option, right? I had to pick one or the other. So I did. And I feel a connection to both. At least sort of culturally, a connection to my Jewish side, and of course, they're very related religions.
Mm,
Um, but I chose Catholicism, because I believe that Christ is God's son, and for the reasons that one would choose to be a Catholic. Um, and it's always been close to me. I won't lie. Like in my 20s and 30s, I wasn't, spending a lot of Saturday nights at church. Um, I would say once my son was born, and I guess I was 35 at that point, it became more central to my mind. And I had never been
you're
confirmed, so then
you're
I
not
went
you're
back.
not letting your son choose, is what you're saying.
No, but he's not in that position. But
Yeah.
both his parents are Catholic. But no, no, he is not choosing. Um, and yeah, so I was confirmed because I hadn't been confirmed. I had First Communion, and I'd been baptized and had First Communion. So I was confirmed, and just started, attending more regularly and just making it more
Yeah.
a part of my life and my son's life. And yeah, it's you have to have an Archimedean point, right? There has to be that one thing that doesn't move, or else nothing else makes sense.
Uh, I agree. I think that part of the conversation in the Catholic Church right now is that we fear that it is moving a little bit. This Pope seems to be all over the map. Matt Fradd, who does a great YouTube show called Pints with Aquinas, he says, during John Paul II and during Benedict, even when we were seeing nonsense at our local parish, we knew that the Pope had our back. Now it's almost the opposite. It's like we don't know what the hell's going on in the Vatican right now with this Pope. But so we're all getting, and I think it's frankly better. I'm very much a federalist. I want us to be more involved in our local parish. What happens in Vatican can be what it is. I think a lot of Catholics are sort of have lost that sort of North Star right now because of Francis.
I think that's right. Look, I think it's awkward. I think it was awkward to begin with that Benedict's still around.
Yeah,
Um, I just, I just think that's a hard situation. It would be one thing if they were very similar popes, right? And it was just like, okay, we're handing this off to
right.
someone who has a similar mindset
Like
to
we've
me.
done for the last 600 years,
Yeah, but I
for the
mean
most part.
the fact that they're both still there and they seem to have such different, takes. I don't know that ultimately they have different takes on the church itself. I think they have different takes on the relationship between the church and the times.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's fair.
uh,
Fundamentally, on the basics of faith and morals, all the things that the papal infallibility is supposed to, it actually represents
yeah,
the foundational faith and morals of the teaching of the church. Francis is 100% in line.
yeah,
Obviously, he has to be. It's the stuff. I mean, I'm sorry, when you're the Pope and you're just shooting the shit with a reporter on the back of the plane and you say, yeah, I don't think hell exists. You can't do that
right,
without creating this big international uproar.
right, right.
It's
Yes, you'd
and then I
want.
feel like we're being gaslighted. It's like, oh no, there's nothing wrong with that. It's like, no, there is something wrong with that. Don't tell me there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, look, I think the Holy Father could probably make a more substantial argument for that position than to, saying on the back of the plane, "I don't think hell exists." Like I imagine he has some theological basis
Yeah.
for this claim, and as you said, right? I mean, the word Catholic means universal, right? So I mean, we do have to. I do think the Catholic Church has to be careful about becoming, too doctrinaire in terms of you know what we're open to discussing. I guess.
Hmm.
But yeah, look, it's. I don't really consider myself a trad cath. I guess. I think I'm a Catholic realist. Like a billion, a 2,000-year-old institution with a billion people is hard to operate. It's always been hard to operate. So I always cut the institution of the church a little, maybe too much slack. I don't know. It seems like
Yeah.
a big job to me.
You mentioned the trads. Have you flirted with the Latin mass at all? Is that because that's one of the big
I
controversies
love
now with it?
I love the Latin mass. It was Sohrab Amari brought me to a Latin mass in Midtown.
Huh.
That's magical. There's no lights. You have a candle. There's the candle's lit. The priest has his back to the
Yeah.
to the pews like Miles Davis.
Right. He doesn't give
And
a shit about the audience.
no,
Absolutely.
it's well, but what it connects you to, I think, with the Latin and with the chanting and with the sort of lack of electricity and stuff, it does connect you to the medieval roots of the mass and of the experience that we have, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is one of the things that's so wonderful about being a Catholic is that everywhere I travel around the world, I can go to mass.
Yep.
And mass is mass.
And
It
it's the
differs.
same readings in Hong
It's
Kong today than it is in
that's
Venice.
that's right.
Yeah.
And,
It's
and
very
I'm
cool.
I'm sort of home wherever
Yeah.
I go.
Absolutely.
And it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And I love that feeling of connection. And what going to the Latin Mass gives you a feeling of is that connection with history, that connection with the
Yeah.
idea that 1,000 years ago people were doing exactly what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think especially in today's day and age when the definition of our most fundamental concepts and ideas change every 12 seconds. It's very good to go tap into some of that stuff.
You're in a great town to be Catholic too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some of the best churches in the country there, and there's a great history of the Catholic culture. Where in Brooklyn are you? Are you like Brooklyn Heights, Carroll Gardens? Where are you?
No, I'm not fancy. What are you crazy?
Wait,
No.
Carroll Gardens is fancy?
Carroll Gardens is fancy, yeah. But
That's where that was the
how
first
long
place I
ago?
lived when I moved to New York.
No, Carroll Gardens has been fancy for like well over a decade.
Oh,
They
that was a
put
big
fancy
mafia
like
town.
subways.
That was
Oh
like
yeah,
a
no, the
mafia
social
neighborhood.
club on Third Avenue is still there.
Exactly. All
Glory
right.
Social Club. No, they're still
It was
there.
a protected neighborhood, they
No,
told me when I moved
the
in.
old
Don't
guy
worry,
like
it's
peering
protected.
out the window, like
Yeah.
No, I live in Bay Ridge, so I live in South Brooklyn.
Oh, all right.
Like way down, or as I refer to it, America. I have New York's only Republican member of Congress, Nicole Maliotakis.
That's borderline Long Island right there, is what it is.
No, borderline Staten Island.
Oh, that's right. Bay Ridge is that way.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of is it Red Hook? What's it called? I don't. But that
Or like up past Coney Island. Yeah, but Brooklyn's people don't realize
Brooklyn's giant.
Brooklyn would be by population. Brooklyn would be the third largest city in the United States by itself.
Wow.
LA would be first, then Chicago, then Brooklyn.
Wow.
No, LA would be first, then the rest of New York City, then Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No,
Gotcha,
Brooklyn's
gotcha.
huge.
Yeah.
And awesome.
How do you fix New York? Or wait a minute, maybe there's you don't accept the premise that New York is broken and needs fixing. Why don't we start there?
New York's always broken. When there's like this fantasy that for like 10 minutes in 1997, everybody was like Giuliani's mayor, everything's perfect.
Hey,
It never was.
he
Right?
did get rid of the heroin
No,
dealers
he's
on
great.
42nd
No,
Street.
he's like the greatest mayor in the history of New York. I'm not going to argue with that, right? And I thought that Bloomberg was fine in terms of sort of marshaling prosperity or whatever.
Yeah.
I am a firm believer that New York City was at its prime whenever the person talking was about 24 years old. So, like, whatever that is,
that's
actually
very wise.
Right? That's when New York was like, if you talk to some 70-year-old, he's going to be like, New York in the 50s. You don't know what you missed. And he's right.
That's great.
And if you talk to someone who tells you about Studio 54, they're right.
Yeah.
Everybody's right. Everybody's New York is the best New York that there ever was. Look, I've struggled with how to cover this story because it is absolutely trending in the wrong direction. There are a lot of bad signs. And I will say, in September, I wrote the New York Post sent me out with a photographer into Midtown, like near Penn Station, like right in the middle of the skyscrapers and stuff, right? And we just it looked like San Francisco almost, right? There you just saw the junkies with the needles, you saw open air drug deals, you saw it was bad. Again, not as bad as San Francisco, but looked like it was going in that direction. I would say the past couple of weeks being in Midtown, whatever it was, whether Adams put more cops out, whether there's just more people out and about, that's started to change. There's not guys with scales and big bags of weed sitting on 34th and 6th Avenue
Yeah.
that there were 6 months ago.
Jeez.
So look, I think the city will come back. It always does. Um, it's always young people with new energy, and then sort of like old guys like me try to create opportunity, and we feed off the energy of them, and they learn some stuff from us, and that story's as old as New York, and it's not going to change.
Yeah. It's I used to say that New York's a great place to live if you're like just dirt poor and
Hmm.
you don't care, but you just love it because you're surviving. Or if you're ultra rich, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I listen, if I had the kind of money to live, in Trump land there, Central Park West or up on uh well, I guess everywhere is an expensive neighborhood in Manhattan now, but that would be great. The middle class, it's impossible. That's why.
I think you're exactly right. I think you're I mean, yeah, for at least a decade, if there was no money for groceries, there was always somebody having an art opening where there was wine and cheese, and there were usually several of those on any given night,
Or
right?
there's still, I mean, even forget wine and cheese. I mean, Lee, you got fancy friends. They got those $5 whole cheese pizzas still. I mean,
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah. But
$5,
even
a whole cheese
but
pizza,
see,
that's
that's the
2 meals.
But that's the amazing thing about being a broke artist in New York. It was true to some extent in Philly, but in New York is that what inevitably happens is like you're in the process of getting evicted, right?
Yeah,
But you're not eating cheese pizza. You're actually like at some event at the plaza, like
that's
sitting
incredible.
next to Ray Kelly because like the theater company that you're acting in like has a fundraiser.
That's
You
hilarious.
know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
so you are living this like weird like high life that again the older people create
Yeah.
for the younger people, and the younger people bring the energy and the new ideas, and that's sort of the cycle that New York goes through.
Yeah, that's very much a Jonathan Larson aesthetic, actually.
Mhm.
Have you seen? I haven't seen Tick Tick Boom, but everyone tells me I should see Tick
No,
Tick
I
Boom.
haven't. I
Yeah,
haven't.
all right. We'll watch it together. We'll do a Mystery Science Theater 3000 thing on that.
Sounds good.
Back to the faith real fast, because I don't want to miss the opportunity. You talk about AA and 12-step programs. It How critical is faith to a 12-step program? It seems to me that ultimately that's so important, I would think, to go through recovery with your faith.
Yeah, I mean it's central. It's in almost, it's a higher power is sort of mentioned in almost all of the steps. And that can cut both ways because there are definitely, this wasn't a problem for me because I'm a Catholic. So when I say, I know exactly what my higher power is, I had buddies in rehab, who kind of struggled with this. I remember, one of them I was talking to, and, he was just not a God guy. You know what I mean? Like he's
Yeah,
a combat vet. It's not that combat vets aren't God people, but this was just not his.
because it's a sign of weakness all of a
It wa
sudden,
I
right?
don't know.
Or
I think it was just experiences he had had in the past or whatever it was, but, like, he sort of struggled with the higher power aspect, and as we talked about it, what we kinda landed on was, like, we all have an inherent sense of right and wrong, right? 90% of the time when we do something, we know it was a good thing or we know it was a bad thing, right? There's a little bit of sometimes there's a gray area, but most of the time something inside of us is able to say this is right, this is
yeah,
wrong.
yeah. Paul would say it's God's law written on our heart,
Yes,
on a man's heart.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So even just that concept of your own innate sense of right and wrong is enough for a higher power, right? Like you hear stories about people who made, their favorite football team their higher, just to like put something in that space, right? Um, but no, it's essential because I think it's a great paradox. I wrote about this experience that I had the last time in rehab for Fox, and what I sort of came to at the end is that inherent in the concept of not just AA, but sort of recovery in general, usually anyway, is the idea that I'm powerless to have one drink, right? If I have one drink, I'm going to eventually have a ton of drinks and a bunch of bad stuff is going to happen. Like, I know that's true. It's true.
Yeah.
I know that, right? But what I can do, at least for periods of time, and hopefully, forever, but you do it one day at a time. What I can do is never drink again. That doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
That actually
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense. That the one thing I can't do and the other thing I can do. And really, God is the only thing that can square that circle, because it's really what the concept of God is about, is this question of free will, right? There's a paradox, because God knows all things. So God already knows exactly what you're going to do, right? God already knows if I have one drink, I'm going to have a whole bunch more. But if God already knows, how does that leave me any room for choice?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Right.
that's the
And
predetermination versus free will, which is
yes,
confounding to everything in our lives. Yes.
yes, and that is very much in play when you try to square that circle of why you're able to not have any drinks, but you're not able to have two.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yes. I have to say, I realized after reading your stuff on this and witnessing your recovery journey over the last 14 months, really, right? That I feel awful. I was there with you when you hit rock bottom, or
Mhm.
I was that night, right? I was shocked to learn this, and I feel terrible. And this is why I want to raise this, because I don't. Do you remember
Oh, yeah.
encountering me that night with Kurt Schlichter in
Yes,
Orlando? And yeah,
I
so
do.
and you were obviously feeling no pain, right?
Yes.
And this is why I want to raise it, because I think that in social settings, especially men in our universe, we see somebody who was as toasted as you were that night, and we celebrate it. We were almost like having fun. It was like, wow, Marcus is really gone, but we were having a blast. And I don't think we have the wherewithal to stop and pause and say, well, wait a minute, maybe this isn't actually a very good thing, because something really bad
Yeah.
could have happened to you that night.
I possibly.
Something kind of bad did happen.
What ended up happening wasn't great.
Do you want to talk about
No,
that?
no, well, yeah, no. I mean, I just went on, like, TV, like, refusing to put my cigarette out. I was insane. And it eventually led to me getting, fired from the Federalist, which was after they sent me to rehab, though, which was, um, sort of amazing. Um, yeah, look, I don't
Like,
know, man.
should we have
No,
intervened? Should
no,
we have said something? Should we
I,
have?
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, look, if maybe you shoot me an email at some point and say, like, Dave, are you all right? Like, if you're concerned about it. But
Yeah.
no, like, right then and there, like, I don't think so, because listen, man, if I had made different choices and had a different set of responsibilities right now, I might decide that's what I want to do.
Huh.
Right?
Yeah.
I decided it was what I wanted to do for a whole long time. Right? I co-created a theater show that was centered around
A
bars
bar
and
and drinking.
drinking and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um so no, and I don't regret any of that, right? I mean, there's definitely times when I wish that I had, you know, come to pursue sobriety sooner than I did. I think I definitely stayed at the party too long. But no,
Yeah.
I don't no, I don't think it is
Do you,
the
uh, I love that you wrote about rehab, and that you're open about it. I think it helps people. I think that it brings people to a realization, or it alerts people that there's someone in their life that might need. I'm sure that your latest article at Fox News about this was shared with a lot of people who needed to read it. Do you, my worlds of influence were pretty much New York and Los Angeles. I've been in DC for 10 years now. Very different. Everyone thinks every big American city is the same. It's not. And in New York or LA, it's pretty natural and normal that a lot of people end up in rehab. That's just a thing. I think it's part of the culture there. I think that it's accepted and it's not seen as some sort of stigma.
Yeah.
There are a ton of people in DC who end up in rehab who will never say, I mean, they would rather talk about their plastic surgery
Yeah.
than about going to rehab. How do we,
Or their dark money.
or their, right? Please, are you kidding? They brag about it. That's on the resume. That's how you get your next gig. How can we break through that? I mean, there's so many things in our culture that have been destigmatized that frankly, I wish there was still a stigma associated with, with porn and with other things in our society. But for some reason, there's a stigma there that it's seen as some sign of weakness or a moral failing or something, when it's actually it's a medical thing. It's you know?
No, I mean, I had one buddy who kind of dismissed the whole concept of the stigma, but along the lines that you were saying, he was like, listen, you can dress up as a leather dog with your buddy and be led around Central Park on a leash as a sexual fetish. And like, there's no stigma attached to that. Like there's no more stigma.
I need to know this friend, because that sounds way unhypothetical what he just pointed out.
Yeah, like
incredibly specific example.
But no, there's no more stigma, right? Like do whatever the hell you want, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's no more rules.
But don't tell anyone I go to AA. I mean, what the hell?
I think, well, there's something interesting about that, right? So I actually think that AA and recovery are having a bit of a cultural moment. There's a sitcom right now that's like about some woman who's like just out of rehab. I actually just watched whatever the Liam Neeson Netflix movie is, like the action thing, and like he's in AA and that. Like you're seeing in film and TV a little more acknowledgement of this. One of the tricky things about that is that along with the 12 steps, AA has something called the 12 traditions that came a little later. Right, 12 steps are from the mid 1930s. Traditions, I believe, come about in like the 50s.
Okay.
The 11th tradition says that you have to remain completely anonymous, especially in areas involving like film, TV, the press. And the idea here was to protect against stigma, right? That like if in 1970 I had written that article, maybe somebody follows me to an AA meeting and they see a couple other people, and it was really like, just keep it secret, And I think that's why there's always been a hesitance to push it in culture, because there's literally this kind of rule.
Interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah, and there's definitely people I've spoken to who think that rule has kind of outlived some of its usefulness, and that there's an expression in AA that says attraction, not promotion. That the way you go about getting people to try it is by being attractive, so that people say, oh, this person seems to have something going on, as opposed to actively promoting it. But make no mistake, when the founders of AA in the mid 1930s were creating the program, they were promoting the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Right. They were going to the Rockefellers and saying, like, can you give us some money to promote this? Because we really think it works.
Yeah.
So there's a balance. And I welcome more portrayals of this in our culture and more of a normalization of it. Because it's all over the place.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Days of Wine and Roses?
Mm-mm.
Oh, it's phenomenal. 60s, Jack Lemmon. But it's about a married couple who are addicts, alcoholics, and they go through the process, but they don't both go through it. And they realize how their relationship relied on alcohol. It's great. Yeah. It's great stuff. Yeah. But it was sort of the first mainstream pop culture or mainstream entertainment vehicle that focused on alcoholism and recovery.
Look, I think you're gonna
Lee
see
Remick,
more...
I think, by the way. I think it's Jack Lemmon, Lee Remick. They're both great. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think you're gonna see more of this. I mean, this makes me so angry. I saw this morning that the Times had an article stating that alcohol-related deaths were up 25% in 2020 compared to 2019.
Ugh.
And this was a slow motion car accident. I mean, I knew the moment that the lockdown started. You know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah,
lived it.
yeah,
You know, like that 3 o'clock, 3:30, whiskey or beer became a 10:30 a.m. or a 9:30
yeah.
a.m., right? Like
There's
everyone was
no
joking.
accountability. There's no
Everyone was joking about like day drinking.
yeah,
I didn't know it yet at the time because I had not yet, attempted recovery or really dealt with AA. But from what I know now, I mean, the idea that people couldn't go to meetings, it's cruel. I mean, the idea that a 35, 45-year-old guy, you know, whose life is being saved by these meetings is told he can't go in order to protect him from a virus that has a 0.02% chance of killing him or something. It's tragic. It's just horrible.
do you think if we weren't in the middle of a presidential election, and even more so a presidential election involving the reelection of Donald Trump, do you think any of it would have happened, or at least to the extent that it happened with COVID?
Yes. I think that the point at which the snowball really got rolling down the hill was towards the middle of April, when we were about a month into lockdown in New York, the rest of the country maybe a little less, and it became clear just how much these Democrat governors wanted to use these emergency powers, not just in regard to COVID, but as an excuse to do all manner of
Yeah,
things without having to ask the state legislature about it.
yeah.
And at that point, Newsom in California, Cuomo in New York, Whitmer in Michigan. At that point, I think Trump or no Trump, they weren't letting go of that power.
Interesting. Let's get venturing back into politics then. Do you first of all, were you where were you on Trump during the primaries in 16? Were you an early adopter to
No, I was
Trump,
very
or
I was very anti the
and is
Wall
that
Street
because of your
Journal.
New York experience? A lot of New Yorkers were
In
like,
in
"We
large
know
part,
this guy." Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
large part. I mean, I knew, for example, without a shadow of a doubt that doing the business that he did in the 70s and 80s, that he was involved with the mafia.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew my
Impossible not to be. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like yes, right? And we knew who Trump was, and he just seemed so completely off the wall to me that I was really scared about what he would do with that level of power. It was way too much of an unknown, and I was very, very never Trump. I was very anti-Trump.
Were
Uh,
you even right up to election day that
up
year? You
to
were never
election
Trump?
day, up to election day, and I'll never forget when he won, because I was all set to, I was, any columnist will tell you that the job is way easier and a lot more fun when the other side's in power.
Oh, absolutely.
All you're just
Absolutely.
throwing rocks at windows. Like, it's
Yeah.
great. You do whatever you want. As soon as your guy's in power, now it's like, oh, well, I think you misconstrued that. What we actually did, it's like you're just like trying to correct stuff all the
Yeah.
time. Like,
Or how many articles a week can you write about the media? Because you can always find something
yeah,
about the
yeah,
media.
it's that's what it is. But I remember when Trump won, and just thinking like, oh my god, like what am I going to do, right?
Yeah.
And I emailed one of the guys in the business who I have the most respect for, who we're pretty close in age, but I think of him as a mentor, David Harsanyi,
Oh,
who's at
yeah.
National Review now, but he was at the Federalist at the time.
Also never Trump, but he absolutely figured out a way to make a pivot there.
Yeah, and well, I remember I emailed him either that night or the next morning, and I was like, what the hell are we gonna do here? And David said, listen, you call balls and strikes. If he does something you like, you say you like it. If he does something you don't like, you say you don't like it. That's the job. Like, that's what
Yeah.
you do. And that made sense to me. And so that's what I did. I'd say 7, 8, or 9 months in, I realized that the sky wasn't falling, and that Trump was doing a lot more stuff that I liked than stuff that I didn't like.
Yep.
And so I said, I was wrong.
Yeah, a lot. It's hard for not a lot of pundits are able to say that, that I was wrong, and I wish more of them did, because I always say he wasn't my first choice, he wasn't my second choice, but Trump was definitely my last choice. When it came to election day, I was voting for him, and one of the things that changed my mind was, I think there's a real benefit of doing talk radio versus writing columns exclusively, because when you
Mhm.
do talk radio, you know, we put out the phone number and people call in, and I get to hear what they're thinking and where they are on all of it. And I realized that summer, just how pissed off everybody was. I mean, I
Yeah.
knew they were pissed off, but
I fully believe that that was an advantageous window for you to have.
do
You know
too.
who one of the early guys, one of the first guys in New York City to say that Trump was going to win. You know who Mike Francesa is?
Oh, of course, yeah, longtime sports guy on WFAN, absolutely.
Francesa so early was just like, and he's, egotistical Francesa. So he's like, I've known the guy for, I've known the guy for 30 years, blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah,
he's going to win.
yeah,
Okay. He's going to win. I'm telling you, he's going to win. And that's Francesa for like months and months. We're all like, you're out of your mind. Right. But then as you're listening to, and I love sports radio.
me too, me
I
too.
don't drive enough anymore. When I was working as up until about 2 years ago, I was working part-time as a mover. Which was my acting survival job. Though I did journalism, my buddy owned the company, so I just go out and do
Oh, that's
moving. I
great.
loved moving jobs.
Oh, that's so cool.
But just listen to sports radio, and you started to hear it on WFAN, right? You
Huh.
started to hear like Joe from the Bronx and Pat from Poughkeepsie. We're
Yeah,
like, I don't know, maybe we got to give this Trump guy a chance, like nobody else. And it was like you started hearing it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
sure enough, man.
I never went so far as to predict he'd win, but I wasn't. I mean, I'll never forget that night, but I wasn't. I wouldn't say surprised. I yeah, but you gotta break. I mean, it was probably the most momentous election of our
A great
lifetime.
story about Brooklyn, and I wrote this up like 2 days after the 2 3 days after the election.
Yeah.
Um, I'm at this sort of upscale. It's not Whole Foods. It was kind of like a New York version of Whole Foods in Brooklyn, right? Right, fancy upscale, lots of cured Italian meats, and
Yeah, yeah.
18 different kinds of kombucha and all this stuff, right? And
D'Agostino or,
no, it wasn't.
what's the
It
other
was the
one?
one from the Upper West Side.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Free,
Zabar's.
no,
Zabar's.
no, it begins with an F. Anyway,
Well, that's on
eh,
the Upper West Side.
Fairway, Fairway. I think
Fairway?
it's
Alright.
gone now. But in any event, I'm in there. Libby and I were in there, and we were just shopping or whatever. It was like a day after the election, and everyone's depressed. Brooklyn, no, oh my God, man! For like 2 weeks, everyone in
Oh,
Brooklyn was not my neighborhood, but like
Brooklyn was Hillary Central.
that
She
was it.
actually
It was the
literally had
campaign
her campaign
headquarters.
headquarters,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And my neighborhood, there's like pickup trucks and Trump flags, but like in most of Brooklyn,
yeah.
they were sad, man. They were upset. And so we're in the fairway, and I hear this song start. I hear this lick of a guitar, and I'm like, "Oh my God." And it's Skinner. It's Sweet Home Alabama. You know that little beginning,
In Brooklyn?
right?
Yeah.
It's just, and I'm sure it was just like whatever the computer program was, right? The place stopped. The place stopped. All of these like Brooklyn Hillary supporters just had this like look on their face as Sweet Home Alabama
Yeah.
is playing over, and one woman goes up to like some poor like woman who's working there and is like, "This is deeply inappropriate. Can you make this?" And the poor girl in like her apron is like, "I'm sorry, just like you need to make this stop." It's like they don't know how to do that. Like there's some radio station that's, but it was
Oh,
amazing. But it was that, right?
yeah.
Like even hearing that song was enough for these people to just be like, "No."
Yeah. Yeah, and
It's
that
an
I
incredible
mean,
moment.
and it snowballed from there because the collective scream of no just continued
Yes.
for those 4 years. It really did. I mean, the Trump presidency just absolutely just brought out the worst in people in terms of our political
What do
polarization.
you think would have happened? And I don't know that this was ever any kind of a possibility. I mean, what do you think would have happened had most of the Democratic Party actually just been able to come to terms with the fact that Donald Trump is president? This is where we are now, as opposed to pretending for at least 3 years that, like, Putin pressed a button or something. I mean, you get the gist of what
Yeah,
I'm.
no, I absolutely do. If they had treated it like any other
Mhm,
election loss that
mhm.
we've had in our time. I mean,
And
let's not forget, though, I mean, Michael Moore, when he made Fahrenheit 9/11, I mean, he was still, I think, did that win the Oscar, Fahrenheit 9/11, or at least
I
was
don't remember,
nominated
but
for the
yeah,
Oscar? But I mean, this is a so-called documentary that floated the idea that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney had stolen the election and
right.
then started a war for their, for Halliburton and all that stuff. So there's always been an unhinged reaction to Republicans winning.
Yes.
But that said, I mean, nothing compared to what we saw with Trump. If they had reacted in a normal way, I think that I mean, maybe I'm naive, but I think that we'd be much better off and more unified. He certainly would have won re-election. And actually, even more importantly, the 2020 election would have been what it should have been about, which was really about ideas and the direction this country's going. If the
Yep.
Democrats hadn't, see, the Democrats in their own way meddled with their primary. They did. I would have loved to have Donald Trump run against Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders properly represents the direction ideologically that the Democratic Party is going.
I
And
think that's right.
I don't think Trump necessarily, he's not ideological, but he did represent sort of where the conservative movement has ended up in reaction to the left. And we would have finally we need to have cathartic elections in this country
Yeah.
where Ronald Reagan beats Jimmy Carter by, 300 electoral college votes, so that we, the people, can make a statement. No, we're not going in that direction.
I
And
think
we've
that's
delayed
right.
it now. We've delayed it because of what
And
happened.
and it was kind of based on a lie, because one of the things I sort of keep coming back to, like this idea, there's this narrative that like Joe Biden ran as a moderate, but he's governing as like a hyper progressive.
No,
Joe Biden didn't run as a moderate.
no, he told us exactly what he was
Joe
doing.
Biden literally said the words, "I will be the most progressive president in American history."
Yep.
And I think something interesting happened, right? So go back to 2008, and Barack Obama says he's against gay marriage because of his deeply held Christian beliefs, right?
Yeah.
And we all went, "No, you're not."
Right.
Right? I mean, we were all just like, "Okay, we get that you have to say that for whatever 2008 reasons you have to say that, but no, you're not," right? And we all kind of, and that's what we did with Biden when he said, "I'm going to be the most progressive," when he said, "We're going to destroy the fossil fuel industry," when he said all these things. We said, "No, no, 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 you're the old white guy.
Ah,
You've been in
very
the Senate
interesting.
forever. You
Yeah.
don't really mean that. Obviously, you're the moderate here." That's he. We made that up.
Fascinating.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Biden was
Oh,
quite
totally.
clear that he was going to be an absolute crazy man.
But we refuse to
We
believe it 'cause
refused to believe that the
yeah.
old guy in the basement was really going to do that. We thought we
Well, that's
were.
a great point. That's a great point. Because Obama, we're so used to, especially Democrats, but all politicians, lying and saying what they have to do to get
Yeah.
elected or to win their primary, that we just assumed that Biden was doing the same
We've
thing.
been asking, and I've been asking this question for at least 6 months, right? Honestly, most of us have been asking this question throughout the entirety of the Biden presidency. Why is the Biden presidency held hostage by the progressives, right? Like, what is going on? Like, they're clearly so wildly out of step with the
Yeah.
voters, and the polling shows it. Why isn't there a pivot
Hmm.
away from the progressives? I am now convinced that the answer is they're not being held hostage. They are the progressives.
Yeah.
They believe all this stuff.
Yep. It's the only explanation.
It's the
It's
only
the
one
only
left. It's
explanation.
the only explanation left, and
Yeah.
I think it's the truth.
Yep. So you took the journey. You were never Trump. You said 8, 9 months in, you realized there was more to support, certainly, and he surprised you, and it turned out. So then you ended up supporting and voting for him in 2020, I'm assuming?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'd say by a year in,
Yeah.
I was sort of like, I was convinced that he was going to be better than any Democrat who was going to be president.
Even though there were still things to criticize. I mean, listen, I always try to approach it with the balls and strikes, even though I let my
Yeah,
readers or listeners know where my perspective is. But the left made it very easy to defend. I remember 2 months into the Trump presidency, my wife, she likes to say, Meredith likes to say, she was never Trump curious, right?
right.
And 2 months in, she like, I remember her yelling at Twitter saying, "Stop making me defend this man."
Yes.
But they forced us to, because they were so bad. They were so out of control that it just became this natural thing. It's like, listen, I don't even like him, but you're forcing the issue because he's not nearly as bad as you're making him out to be. And in fact, as you said, 8, 9 months in, it's pretty good.
Yeah, listen, one of the reasons that I spend absolutely no time at all really trying to police the right, which, according to some people is like all the right should ever actually be doing, is like,
Yeah.
some GOP state senator in Iowa said like something vaguely racist, and we're, oh my God, like what are we gonna do, right? But one of the reasons that I don't do that is that a lot of journalists and writers and people who were considered to be fringe, and I think in some ways were, right, in the lead up to Trump and sort of during the initial part of Trump's administration, they were describing an imperiled society that I and a lot of my other colleagues doubted, right?
Hmm.
We were like, come on,
Yeah.
it's not this bad. Come on. They're not gonna try to make 4-year-olds be transgender.
Hmm.
Come on. They're not gonna, let a hulking man, be in the pool and win the NCAA. They're
Right.
not going to really say that a fetus is nothing more than a clump of cells,
Right.
right? And then they did all these things.
Yeah.
And I think you had to look at some of these, figures who so many at the important places on the right considered to be out of step or fringe or untouchable or whatever it was. Those guys were right about a lot of this,
Yeah.
about a lot of it, right? And it's one of the reasons I don't throw stones, man, because
Well,
those cats play a really important role, and I dig what
I
they do.
I agree. I never quite understood one of the most shameful episodes of for conservative commentators over the last couple of years was this rush to condemn Nick Sandmann.
Hmm.
Did National Review writers, and I think even my pal Ben Shapiro, for some reason, felt compelled to. I got to tweet out my condemnation of this young man for having a shitty smirk on his face for this, and it's like, why do we need to do that? First of all, we should have learned our lesson. Wait until the whole story comes out,
Yeah.
because there's always, always, always more to it, and they're lying. But secondly, why do we have to be first on that bus? There's plenty of people to criticize conservatives. I don't need to be one of them.
Yeah.
And I don't get that instinct.
No, there's a great Morrissey line that that some people who follow my Twitter feed might know that I'm a great devotee of the Bard from Manchester. But Morrissey writes in one of his songs, "Why waste good time fighting the people you like?"
Right.
And that's really the attitude that I have right now, especially looking at this midterm, right? Where like, as
Yeah.
far as I can tell, the only way that the Republicans can foul this up is with excessive infighting. And so
Mhm.
it's like just stop. Like, we get it. Power is coming, which means that the spoils are going to have to be divided. That's life, that's reality, that's any business. Politics is no different. There's no spoils yet.
Right. So
Get the
chill
spoil
out.
get the spoils first,
Win
right?
first. Win
Then
first.
then start stabbing each other in the back, and we'll all write
Well,
about it, and it'll be a gay old time.
and especially, everybody's focusing on the Ohio primary right now, and it's like, well, I couldn't support him. I couldn't support him. No, no. Here's the thing. This midterm. This is about two legislative bodies
Yes.
where the majority is all that matters. It's all that matters. If some maniac out of Ohio ends up being the 51st Republican in the Senate, that's who I want. I want that maniac, because it's not about him. It's about the majority. And
Yes.
we got to be grown-ups about that.
And that's a principle, right? That's the thing that I think the principles first crowd doesn't really understand,
Right.
is that's a principle, right?
Yes.
The principle of like, you know, you have to take what you can get if you want to make things better, right? As opposed to sort of like sitting around thinking about how wonderful things would be if, it's funny. It's actually that's actually a thing that people talk about in recovery and in addiction treatment, right? And that the AA Big Book talks about. There's a section where it's like, you can't treat life like you're the director of the play, and where you get to like give everybody their lines and tell
Yeah, yeah.
everybody what they're supposed to do, right? And like, you're black, so you're a Democrat, right? And you're like, everybody has their role, and you know, you're a woman, so you have to be pro-choice, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can't order the world like that. You have to accept that. You have to take the world as you find it.
Yeah.
You know, and accept that. And yeah, it's
Well, I also think coming from theater, coming from doing live theater, it's like you face the reality pretty early on in the industry, in the business, that there is no such thing as a perfect performance. It's what makes it so dangerous and fantastic and wonderful. But every single night, the stage manager or director can swing around and say, okay, I got some notes, because there's no such thing as a perfect show.
not
But we,
close.
but we very much get into this mode of it's still great.
Yeah.
With because of the flaws, because of the imperfections, this audience saw this thing that no one else will ever see again. And so you accept imperfections and this whole idea of it's old saying, you don't let perfection get in the way of I can't even remember
Yeah,
what
no,
the
there's
phrase
great
is.
moments. There's one of my favorite moments in theater, and hopefully this is the kind of thing that happens in previews, not once you're running. Although, look, people go up, right? People lose their lines, right?
Yeah.
One of the great things that now two actors can do this in a crowded scene, this is tricky. But when two actors are on stage and you realize that somebody just jumped a bunch of text, right? So you're on page 27,
Oh
you're
yeah.
doing your dialogue, and now your scene partner or you has jumped to page 29.
Yeah.
So you have to do a whole bunch of things at once without the audience knowing that you're doing any of it. First, you have to determine, was any vital plot information just skipped over?
Right. You're
Right?
going through it.
Can
Right.
we get to the end of the play without what we just skipped? And if the
Yeah.
answer is yes, then you probably just, okay, that's you know,
Yeah.
50 seconds of dialogue that the audience doesn't get that night. If though there is something there, right? And like this is going to come back. Now what you have to do is one of you has to find a way to get back to
Yeah.
what to where you missed, right? That's easy enough usually. You can improv your way to that. The tricky part is then you eventually catch up to what
Right.
you've already done
And you can't.
and you have to jump over that. And I've seen that happen in situations where I'm part of the production, so I know it's happening, and the audience has no idea it's happening,
That's
and
great.
it's amazing. Those things are great. I don't know if you Jason Miller, the playwright and actor. People would know him most from The Exorcist. He played the younger priest, but he was like a
Okay.
Tony Award-winning playwright and stuff. And I got to know him a little bit in the late '90s. I was doing a one-man show playing James Joyce in the small theater at
Oh,
this one
cool.
theater.
Oh, cool.
He was doing a one-man show playing John Barrymore in the big theater.
Huh.
It's unbelievable show, by the way. He wrote it and performed. It was incredible. Called Barrymore's Ghost, and we got to be friendly. We were both big Notre Dame fans. We were both big drinkers, so like we'd watch Notre Dame before the show at his hotel room at the Sofitel. And there was one day I came over and I said, you know, I knocked a glass off stage last night and it broke. And he looked at me and he goes, "Did you use it?" Right?
Yeah.
And
You
that
can't pretend it didn't happen.
and that was it. And the answer was, of course, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I muttered something to myself about having broken a glass, and then I, you know, cleaned it up and tried to figure out a way to incorporate it in the blocking or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the attitude, is like it's now.
Yeah. What do you like to watch now? Do you go to the theater? I mean, theater is kind of still screwed up in New York, right? It's not, it's because of COVID and post pandemic, but
I never loved going to the theater. I loved being on stage.
interesting.
I
Yeah.
never loved sitting in the you know, there are some performances that like I saw the original when I was at NYU. One of the studios I studied at was David Mamet's studio, which at the time was called Practical Aesthetics. Now
Oh, yeah.
now it's the Atlantic Studio, Atlantic Theater Company studio. But through that, I saw the first production of Oleana,
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh, dude.
I mean, this was before anyone really knew what they were walking into
Yeah.
in that play. And I've never experienced anything in a theater like that. Literally, by the time that play was over, every couple was in a heated argument by the
Oh, yeah.
time they got out the door.
Oh,
Every couple.
yeah. I didn't see it there. It must have been great. I mean, I saw it. It moved up uptown to the Helen Hayes, and I used to work at the Helen Hayes as well when I was which is the smallest theater on Broadway, 450
This is where
seats,
this
I
was
think.
at the Orpheum. And I'll tell you something fun. The Orpheum, like on St. Mark's, it's not on St. Mark's, on like
Yeah, where
2nd
Little
Avenue, where
Shop used to
the
be. It's like
Orpheum.
200 seats. Yeah.
I swear to God, though, the show that came in after Oleana closed in what must have been 94, maybe, the show that came in was Stomp, and it's still there.
Oh yeah, Stomp. Oh, that's right. Stomp's at the Orpheum. That's right.
It's been there since.
It's
The
amazing.
last show that was in that space was
But
Oleana in like 1994.
talk about a fucking prophet, Mamet with Oleana. I mean, he said literally 20 years ahead of his time with that. And of course, and it takes, if I remember right, it's a professor, so it's a college, a university environment. It's funny when, in 2008, first thing Andrew Breitbart, I reached out to Andrew the same way you reached out to Ben. Andrew says he was on the Dennis Miller show, and he says he's going to start a conservative website called Big Hollywood, and it's for conservatives in the entertainment business, and it's based out of LA. So I was in LA at the time with I was post Schubert, but I was still a general manager for independent productions, and I sent him an email and I said, I'm a conservative, but I'm in the theater business. Are you interested in me writing for you? And the first thing he wanted me to write was about David Mamet writing that article. He wrote an article in the Voice
The
that said,
brain dead, why I'm not a
why
brain
I
dead
am no
liberal.
longer a brain dead liberal. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a bit part of what I wrote, and I wrote it and they published me the first day. But part of what I wrote is, why is anyone surprised? If anyone has seen David Mamet's work for the last 20 years, and I mentioned Oleana, it's like this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone.
Yeah.
Because it permeates his art. I mean, everything, his voice, but it's not even a conservative voice. It's just a practical.
It's a realistic one.
A real, yes.
It's a very realistic voice, and it's a voice that takes the world as it is, not as he aspires for it to be.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is a reversal of something that Ted Kennedy, in his eulogy for his brother Robert Kennedy, actually lionized him by saying he saw the world not as it was, but as a world as it could be. And it so perfectly encapsulates the naivete of liberal Democrats of that era, because that's not what we want. We don't want politicians and elected officials to visualize a world as it could be, because we're actually living in the world as it is.
Yes.
That's, I think, a great distinction between Reagan conservatism and Kennedy liberalism.
Yeah, I mean, a common theme in all of Mamet's work, and again, I'm a style guy, so it's in his style as well. That staccato, a lot of cursing, that sort of quick back and forth that Mamet's known for. It's a fight. It's a struggle. One of the acting exercises that Mamet really was very into, and the people who taught for him was sort of variation on a Meisner exercise. It was called the repetition exercise. And you'd sit, 2 feet apart from your, partner there. And you just say a word, and they would either have to repeat the word you said or say a new word, and you could either repeat or say a new word. Ideally, you're noticing something about the person, though. Like, you're wearing glasses. It can be that simple, right?
Yeah.
And the idea of the exercise was to take all of the focus sort of off of yourself, the way a con man would, right? And just be analyzing every aspect of this person who you're interacting with. And he understands, and his work understands, that everybody's working under multiple motivations at the same time. And everybody's a really complicated anti-hero type of character.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, who, if you were to do more work in theater again or go back, who would you like to work with? Is Mamet one of those people?
I mean, anybody would want to work with Mamet. There's a wonderful playwright. I think he's still at NYU. It's a guy by the name of Len Jenkin, who I did a play with at the Flea Theater. It was called Margot Vale and Entertainment, and there were 8 actors, 4 men, 4 women, and we played this whole ton of characters in this very strange. It almost felt kind of Weimar, kind of just like weird world of like what's going on, and like there's a dead body on a train, and like I had a monologue where like my character was like in Lithuania and he had lost his pants and he's calling his secretary like trying to figure out like what's going on. was just this wonderful, wonderful, and I'd love to work with Len. Len was the kind of guy who you just sort of imagine on 9th Avenue and like 41st Street in his hat, and like
Yeah.
somehow like he runs into like his long lost twin sisters. It's like that kind of weird, like David Lynch type of like.
Yeah. Who is I mean, that's a character in New York literally over the last 120 years. He could have been on that same street corner. Yeah.
I love 9th Avenue. 9th Avenue is just like no one's ever going to make anything nice out of 9th Avenue, and nobody wants to try. It's great. It's great. It's just 9th Avenue.
Yeah, I jokingly, when I asked you to do this thing with me today, I jokingly said we could go 2 hours, and we're right up against the 2-hour mark. This is
There you go.
amazing.
That's
Thank you,
great.
man. This has
No,
been
it's my
great.
pleasure.
And I still have, well, so let's go back to politics real fast, because now let's look past the midterms. Do you want Trump to win, to run in 24? Do you think he will run in 24? Which is two very different questions.
I try not to do a lot of like what I want. Like I don't think like what I want is terribly like relevant to like anyone except maybe
That's
my
fair.
son.
That's fair.
I would say that's a hard question. If the question is, do I wish Donald Trump was president right now? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
If
Absolutely.
the question is, do I think it would be good if Donald Trump won the 2024 election? The answer is yes. Right. I don't know if you want to throw in like, is it DeSantis or Trump? Like, I'm not there
Well,
yet.
let me put it this way. See,
Yeah.
I think I go back and forth on this. Personally, I think for the changes that Trump sort of brought to American electoral politics and sort of what he attempted to achieve and what he did achieve, and just merely by being such an outsider and such an iconoclast and such a message, it set anybody who says there wasn't a message sent by electing Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton is just high, right? And
Yeah.
that's critically important. For it to last, for it to actually take hold, I actually think, I know the instinct is, well, if he wins again, that validates it. No, actually, if somebody else runs on the same stuff that Trump ran on and wins, that locks it in. You know what I mean? Then it's not,
Yeah.
well, it was a reality star and people hated Hillary and it was just a one-off. No. If you get someone like DeSantis or I don't know who else, I'm just saying his name because he's there.
Yeah.
If he runs on pretty much the same thing Trump ran on, but isn't Trump, and he wins, then that locks it in as, okay, this is a movement.
I think there's something to be said for that, and it kind of makes Trump almost like a Moses figure, right? Like Moses brings you there, but he doesn't get to go to the promised land, right? His job is to get you there, and because he is imperfect, right? Because he sinned against the Lord, he doesn't, because he tweets too much and says nasty things about people, and let's be honest, lies sometimes, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't get to go to the promised land. But yeah, listen, whoever the nominee is in 2024, anyone with a serious chance is basically going to be running on Trump's agenda, because everybody has Trump's agenda.
Yeah.
There is no other agenda left. There's no neoliberal, there's no return to that. There's no way.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And the couple of people that they're floating is, well, everybody wants Romney to run again. I actually don't hate Romney. I am frustrated with Romney. And I think he adores the media attention a little too much. I'm very, very suspicious of Republicans who like the media.
Nobody likes Romney is the problem, and maybe they should. I don't know. I just like Romney always struck me as like the guy who, like, if he's your boss, almost like Bloomberg. If he's your boss, you're kind of like, yeah, he's a good boss. Company's growing. Like all my HR needs are met. Like I'm happy with my position. Do you want to go hang out with him? No.
Yeah. My big problem with Romney is that he ran for Senate in Utah. It was so obviously critically important for him to still be in the
But what
game
what would
in
Romney even run
NDC.
on that would be a
Foreign
the,
policy.
well, yeah, but again, I think that goes back to the fact that we don't that there is no firm Trumpian foreign policy. Like
Yeah.
it really seemed to be moment by moment, and he would take every situation into individual account. That's not to say that he wasn't looking at the broader picture, but he was not first and foremost a broader picture guy. He took care of the deal that was in front of him. And so I don't think there was very much of a cohesive approach to foreign policy.
All right. So you have friends coming into New York. They've got one night, and you're going to take them out, not necessarily to your favorite place,
Yeah,
but to ape. You're going to take them out for a night in New York, dinners, drinks. Well, you'll have seltzer water.
thank you.
Music, nightclub, whatever it is. But it's like you're only going to be in New York. You've never been to New York. You got to do one night in New York. This is what it's going to be. What does that night look like?
I mean, I'm probably keeping them in Manhattan if they've neve never been to New York before. Like, Brooklyn takes a little more getting used to.
More of the
Um,
acquired taste.
yeah, I vastly prefer Brooklyn to Manhattan, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
for the person coming in, I mean, for music, there's a great jazz club called Smalls, where if you're if you're someone who stays up late at night, a lot of times if you're there at like 1-2 o'clock in the morning, after the Blue Note or the sort of fancy places are done with their like $80 shows or whatever, a lot of those musicians will just show up.
Huh.
This is the place where they'll sort of come and just do
So
their
it's like Don't Tell Mamas is the cabaret place in Hell's Kitchen where all the Broadway
yes,
actors go after the show
yeah.
and
But
start
they'll
singing
go to
show tunes.
play, right? I mean,
Right.
they'll
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, they go and they take the mic and they'll start
Sometimes
singing.
they will, yeah. I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
they'll jump up and like sit in or whatever. So Smalls is a
And
great
that's in the
venue.
Village.
Yeah, it's a great venue for music. Dinner. I actually think that Philly's a better food town than New York.
Well, I'm sorry, we're out of time, David. We
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
get the Are you
I,
kidding me? Philly?
No, no. My favorite restaurant in the country is called Vetri. It's a sort of like nouveau Italian place on Spruce Street. And I forget the name of the chef, but he's one of these widely regarded international. Philly's always been
Right.
a good food. Lebec Femme was one of the early sort of like adopters of French cuisine. But the one place I always take everybody who comes to New York, and it's even the place where I tend to meet people if I have to have a sit down with somebody or whatever, is Cafe Reggio on McDougal Street, which
Cafe
is
Reggio. Okay.
Cafe Reggio is a coffee house. It's really what it is. They have sandwiches and pastries and stuff, but it's really just a coffee house. You can sit there for 3 hours, with your cup of coffee. It's been
Yeah.
there, I think, since 1937. I think
Wow.
it has the oldest espresso machine in the country, and it's just a village institution. It's, sort of Renaissance era paintings all over the. You can't smoke in there anymore, which I mean, you haven't been able to smoke in there for 20 years. So I miss that,
Yeah.
but it's a magical place. It's a great
I
place.
get the sense that if budget weren't an issue, you'd live in the Village. Am I wrong? I know you love Brooklyn, but
It's less budget. It's actually more sort of like kid and like school and like
oh,
that kind of
jeez.
thing.
You
But I
old fart.
I
God.
know, man, but I do like Bay Ridge a lot.
Yeah.
Having grown up in Northeast Philly, like Bay Ridge is a neighborhood, but Bay Ridge is a Brooklyn neighborhood. It still has its Brooklyn. My neighbor, I just got a haircut this afternoon from Luigi. He's got to be 70 years old. 1970, he opened his one seat barber shop. You go in there, and he's
Yeah.
either got all he ever has on TV is soccer or Fox News.
Ha, ha, ha.
That's it.
You know what? Yeah, I'm sorry. I was wrapping up, but now I got to ask you one other thing that I wanted to ask you. If you're all right, you got a
Yeah,
couple
no, I'm
more
good.
minutes.
Where am I going?
You mentioned, let's talk about the Village and theater and all that. When the same-sex marriage issue pretty much got taken off the table with the Supreme Court ruling, I actually had some hope that conservative. Let me go back a couple of steps. I actually believe that individual gay men and women in this country, and we work in theater, so we have a lot of friends that are gay, and we cohorts, coworkers and stuff. I tend to think that their ideological home is very much a libertarian. I just want to live my life. I want people to let me live my life, get out of my business kind of stance. Especially, a lot of gay male Republicans are in that world. They're in that kind of mindset. They're very suspicious of the government being involved in things. And so they tend to lean that way. And I was hoping, and they're also, for the most part, very entrepreneurial spirited. They are professional. They make money. They like to keep their money. They don't like high taxes. I was hoping that when gay marriage sort of got off the cultural radar, then more gay people would find themselves voting Republican or Libertarian because they didn't see it as a cultural threat. And then this transgender issue crept in, and I don't think conservatives can bend on the transgender issue. I think it is so fundamental. I don't know, you tell me. And one thing that's interesting to me is that I find a lot of gay men who will say privately, I'm a gay guy. I don't have anything to do with transgender. They don't like the fact that it's lumped together.
Yeah.
The T and the LGBT, their worldview and their fights and struggles are very different than a transgender individual. So I guess I'm throwing it out there as just sort of what's your take on that, and what is the right approach on this in terms of addressing it and possibly even finding a lane for expanding uh the conservative voice on
I mean,
this
yeah.
issue.
Look, not only did the transgender movement sort of take over the gay rights movement at about the time that marriage equality was affirmed. Um, it's they didn't just do that. I mean, they've gone further in terms of even erasing it to some degree, right? I mean, there's a lot of controversy over the way the story of Stonewall is told now.
Hmm.
Because the story of Stonewall is now being centered around two players who were important players, but like weren't the whole thing, who were cross dressers,
Right.
right? They weren't trans. They would not have known what that meant, right?
Right.
They were men who wore dresses.
They were in drag. Yeah.
And so when that Stonewall movie came out several years ago, there were all these protests from the LGBT community saying like, you needed to have centered the trans voice here or whatever it is. So, I mean, there's definitely tension there. I was just last week, I was at a panel of TERFs, I guess you'd say, they will call themselves that now. And I was the only man in the room. And one of the women said something that I thought was funny and true. She said that once gay men in the gay movement achieved marriage equality, they handed the movement off to men in dresses who call themselves lesbians.
Hmm.
And it was the first lesbians who they ever liked. Right?
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that was sort of that was sort of the attitude. And if you get that joke, you get that joke. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's more than a joke, right? I think it's true,
I think
and
it
I
is
think
too.
that
Yeah.
this did become the gay rights movement. I mean, women were always even when they were the ones taking care of AIDS victims in the 80s. I mean, women were always sort of like on the outside of all of this, and so I think, look, I've spent a lot of time writing about this. I'm just writing a piece right now about this for Fox, about how something's changed now. We're not going to walk on eggshells about this anymore. And it's not about attacking any transgender person. It's about attacking an entire industry now
Hmm.
that exists to confuse children about their gender. It's about attacking sports leagues and the NCAA who want to pretend that this fiction is reality. It's about attacking school boards who, that's where the fire is going to be directed. And it's already angrier than it has been in the past, where it's been much more of a polite conversation. I think that polite conversation is over.
All right. Final question. The Nets going to make the playoffs? Guys are so fucking loaded. You like open up the trunk, pour out all the money, you get everyone to play for you, and you can't even make the top 8. I mean, for God's sake.
Yes. If the season ended today, I think they'd be in a play-in game. But I just happened to be reading the New York Post, and I looked at the odds to win the Eastern Conference to
Yeah.
go to the NBA Finals, and the Nets have the best odds of any Eastern Conference team to go to the finals. They have they're behind the Suns to win the NBA championship. So yes, the Brooklyn Nets are well positioned.
That's just because everyone in Brooklyn has FanDuel and they're driving the odds.
No, we need to get the vaccine mandate changed so that Kyrie can play at home.
Yeah.
Right.
It is so astounding that Kyrie sits there in the stands without a mask and watches the game, but he can't put on his shorts.
But look, honestly, if that doesn't change, and I expect that it will, but let's say we get to the playoffs and that doesn't change, I don't want the Nets to have a top 4 seed because I want them to be the road team in every series.
Oh, geez.
Because then I get Kyrie for 4 games, not 3.
So it's all part of the plan. I see
right?
how it works.
I don't think it's all part of the plan. No, the Nets are going to be fine with or without Ben Simmons. And beyond that, they're really a joy to watch. I mean, I don't think there's a more enjoyable player to watch than Kevin Durant. And if there is, it might be Kyrie. I mean, they're both just magicians. And
Kevin Durant's phenomenal. He's actually the only thing that has kept me watching the NBA because I used to love the NBA, and Kevin Durant's one of the players that I still really enjoy, and I've kept. Meredith is from Oklahoma, so she, she played for them, and I was hoping he'd come to the Wizards because he's from Prince George's County, Maryland, right outside DC. But of course, he followed the money and the fame and the ladies in Brooklyn. So
and the wonderful, pizza and bagels and
it does look like a great atmosphere in that arena. I gotta say,
it is. I'll tell you a funny story about that arena. So that arena is at Atlantic and Flatbush, right, which is right in the middle of downtown Brooklyn Heights,
and all the trains intersect right there. Yeah,
and they did a really great. The arena's a very nice arena, and the footprint's really small, and there's no parking lots really. I mean, there's a couple way away, but they did a really nice job. But the funny thing about that arena is in the early 1950s, when Walter O'Malley was deciding whether the Brooklyn Dodgers were going to stay in New York or whether they were going to go out west, he told Robert Moses, the famous city planner in New York, he wanted a stadium with a retractable dome, no less, but he wanted a stadium at Atlantic and Flatbush.
Huh.
And Moses said, no, if you stay, you got to go to Queens, where the Mets are now, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I hate Queens, so I completely understand why this guy was like, I'll go anywhere except Queens. And they end up going to LA. But fast forward 63 years, I guess, whenever the Nets came, and Brooklyn gets a team back, and where does it go? Atlantic and Flatbush. There it is.
Flatbush. So that is pretty cool.
Happened. Yeah.
If the Nets and the Sixers meet in the playoffs, is it even a coin flip for you, or you're all in for the Nets?
I'm all in for every other sports team I root for is the Philly team that I grew up with.
Yeah.
I think the Nets came in 2013, and I already lived in Brooklyn, and I thought it was great that Brooklyn, not New York, but Brooklyn, had its team. And also, I think my son was 3. So it was really important to me that he be an Eagles and a Phillies fan, which he is. Less important to me that he be a Flyers fan, and he's not that into hockey anyway. Basketball was where I felt like we could both have a New York team. So that sort of went into it as well.
Hopefully we'll edit this part out that you actually deliberately raised your kid to be an Eagles fan, because that's the Child Protective Services will be knocking on your door.
It's the only kind of proper football fan. I mean, he knows how to throw a battery.
Well, exactly. So you're excited about Carson Wentz being with my Commanders now, right? My Washington.
I liked Wentz, man.
I do too. I'm pretty happy that Washington.
I think the name of your team is ridiculous, but I mean,
what are you talking about?
The Commanders?
Why do you hate the military so much,
That's
David
where
Marcus?
we landed?
Why do you hate the military?
I guess it's fine. No, you guys, I don't know. You guys you're just not good, man.
Dude.
The Eagles went, my whole life as like the only NFC East team without a Super Bowl, right? Like that was the whole knock on us. And then we finally got our Super Bowl. Not only did we get it, but we're still the last team to win one.
Yeah.
So that's where we are today. Like, what have you done for me lately?
I'm from Detroit originally, so I can't really engage in this conversation any further. Still the Lions situation. All right, David Marcus, I've taken enough of your time, but let's do this again.
I had a blast.
This is great, and we're gonna chop this up and put out a ton of little snippets for people.
Fantastic.
and also run the whole thing on YouTube, and
Great.
it's going to be great. And thank you for doing all the things you're doing. You're a great voice, an important voice. I'm glad you're on my side.
Thank you.
And keep up the great work. Are you working on a book right now? You see, I didn't even talk to you about your book action. I'm always impressed by people who write books.
Yeah, no, Charade came out last year. It's called Charade, the COVID lies that crushed a nation.
Yeah,
I'm not. I don't know. I'm tired of writing about COVID. So, because that only covered 2020. So conceivably, I could write a sequel to it that covered 2020. I don't want to have anything to do with it
yeah.
anymore. I'm so tired of it. So I don't know. We'll see. Nothing right now. I'm just, I'm busy running as many columns as I can. So we'll see what happens down the road.
Well, keep it up. Thanks for everything you do,
Thanks, man.
and good luck one day at a time. There, you're inspirational, actually, for a lot of people, I think, on the recovery road. So
I appreciate that.
I appreciate it. All right, man. That's David
Yeah.
Marcus. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time, doing whatever we're doing next time. Take care, Dave.